start to make ourselves this way. We'll get started here in just a second. A quick reminder that I have a request before we start. If you can make sure that you talk into the mics when you come to the podium as well, and if someone can remind me when they're talking on this to put my microphone down there because I will forget, that would be greatly appreciated. So
I'll take care of that.
thank you, sir. So with that, I would like to call the August 1st meeting of the State Board of Education together. Please call the roll.
Present. Present.
Present.
Here.
Mr. Walker?
Present.
Mr. Watts?
Here.
Ms. Wicker?
Here.
Dr. Yeager?
Here.
Here.
Okay, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And the first item of business is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have approval of the minutes.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We do not have a statement of the chair. Board member comments and reports. Any comments or reports? I have one, and it's certainly not a call for action, but I've been approached by some folks in our region that are concerned with the letter grade from the federal level. So I would like for us at some point to maybe have a conversation about that, because I know that growth is capped, and the general diploma doesn't count, and I don't want our schools receiving grades that, from a federal level, when it's not mandated, that may be lower than what our state grades would be. That is a little confusing, so if we could just think about this. Certainly don't want any action today, just want to plant that seed for something for us to think about. Because I don't know if anybody else shares those concerns, but schools in my area certainly have them. Any other comments?
Should that be an agenda item next month?
I would hate to do that without Jennifer here. I mean, I would rather just have that conversation. I just wanted to plant the seed while it was fresh in my mind.
Okay.
Thought I would bring it up, and I would rather have that conversation with her and see how or if we're going to handle it.
If appropriate, sounds like a good agenda.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. No other comments?
This is Katie.
Yes.
This is a process question in follow-up to the observation you just made. The only way we could address that would be for the Department of Education to amend the ESSA plan. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, but I'm seeing head nods, so yes, that's correct, Katie.
So just, again, as a point of clarification in terms of what would be needed next for us to consider that, I'm not sure, and I understand that we're not making any formal motions at this time, but just to raise that issue, because that would seems to be a presentation, or a recommendation that would need to be brought forth by the department in order to advance that.
Okay, that's certainly something we can discuss prior to September.
That would be one way. Is another way for the state to change their plan? For us to change the state plan? Didn't we approve a state plan?
I don't know that we would want, if we did that, then we would lose general diplomas counting, and also growth would be capped, which that is what has schools scared.
So that's why the original second set of grades.
Exactly. Okay, seeing none, public comment?
I'm going to recuse myself.
morning, members of the board,
Good morning.
those present and on the phone. My name is Eric Lewis with Charter Schools USA. With me is Michael Dunnigan, principal at the Madonna Elementary and Middle School, Dana Smith, our grants specialist, and Jackie Sissel, our community engagement representative. As a leader of our Indianapolis-based team, directing the TSO efforts for CSUSA and Noble Education Initiative, I'm here to direct your attention to the funding structure for Madonna Middle School. All three turnaround academies were approved by the state board for use of the SIG funds at your June meeting. The communication and timing of the SIG funding process for the 18-19 funds were discussed. A 21% reduction of the SIG funds was approved above the initially anticipated 15%. The application was immediately released and we submitted our SIG applications within the timeline provided. On July 20, we received notification from the Department of Education, Indiana Department of Education, from Nathan Williamson stating the following. On June 13, 2018, the State Board of Education approved the Federal School Improvement Grant funding for your LEA to serve identified turnaround academies. However, some questions remained. As a result, the IDOE and the State Board of Education staff submitted questions to the U.S. Department of Education in order to resolve these questions. The Education Department, the U.S. Department of Education, responded on July 5, 2018. Based on the written communication received July 5, 2018 from the Office of State Support and the Office of General Counsel of the U.S. Department of Education, the Indiana Department of Education has been advised that it is not authorized to release any of the SIG funding until final federal accountability determinations are made in late fall 2018 for the 2017-18 school year. I'm assuming in the letter that that's a discrepancy of the 18-19 school year, but that's how it was written. Mr. Williamson followed up with a phone conversation to confirm receipt of this communication and for clarification. Mr. Williamson's clarification in the email and the conversation on the phone was that the two high schools have the data under the federal graduation rate that will allow the process of approval to begin for T.C. Howe and Emmerich Manual, which will allow for approval of the plan and reimbursement for grant spending as of late October. That is, if our improvement efforts haven't deemed the school ineligible altogether under the plan. The implications of this process are anything but trivial. The plan presented to the board in June required the support of the $705,000 that we submitted in our SIG application. Most of the planned use of funds support the staffing of instructional specialists, instructional interventionists, instructional aides, and systems to continue the student growth and sustain improvements achieved to date, including proficiency increases and anticipated growth to move the school from the failing list and beyond. Delaying approval and release of the funding until the conclusion of the first quarter of the school year requires our team to consider immediate and drastic cuts. These cuts stall the interventions intended to make dramatic impacts in student achievement for at least the first quarter of the school year, and frankly, will end this year's interventions by losing critical staff without the possibility of filling these positions later in the school year. These teachers and staff reported 10 days ago for training and planning. We begin school this Monday, August 6th. The notification on July 20, with staff reporting July 23rd, left us with very few options. Even applying the advised strategy of Mr. Williamson of realigning our Title I funds for critical spending, we still face critical cuts of at least 8 current staffing positions that are filled, after-school programming, tutoring funding, supplies, and all of the summer interventions programs that are as they are currently structured. Our efforts have been approved and supported by the state board throughout this process. We have reported with transparency on these efforts, and the funding support has been consistent by the board all along. We are in a position that requires a solution, and we trust that the board will address this gap to honor the funding approved in June for the efforts already underway for the 18-19 school year. And we appreciate your thoughtful consideration for a timely solution. As it currently stands, we are not eligible for reimbursement for any of the funds that we're currently planning to use. That would essentially require immediate stoppage of interventions to wait for the plan. So a solution that we require is timely, it's urgent. We appreciated the board's action in June to be able to allow us to write our plans and to plan forward for where we currently are. But as we stand now with this clarification and the Department of Education's, the Indiana Department of Education's notification, we are again stalled at Madonna Middle School. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, anybody else? Welcome.
So my name is Megan Wooster. I'm here on behalf of the Indiana Foreign Language Teachers Association and their advocacy committee. I understand that the new diploma requirements are in the process of changing, and with the recent defeat of the codes amendment to at the national level, I'm just here to reiterate to the board the importance of world languages in our state. People who speak a second or third language are of the utmost importance in Indiana. At the recent language roadmap meeting, we were informed that there are around 8,000 jobs across the state that are unfilled because they need people who speak a second language. People who speak a second language are needed in every job field, from healthcare to first responders to business and the military. Therefore, for the good of our economic and security interests in Indiana and beyond, I urged you to support world language education and protect its place in the graduation and pathway requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that it? Okay, thank you. We do not have a best practice today. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, do we need a roll call for that? Or can we do voice vote? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Consent agenda, latchkey waiver, West Central, oh, I'm sorry, wrong one. New business, locally graded pathway, Waukegan Community Schools. Welcome.
Morning, my name is Scott Croner, Superintendent for Waukegan Community Schools, and on behalf of our school corporation and Northwood High School for Industries, we thank you for the opportunity to speak. Members of the board, in your board packet, you have a copy of our application for a locally created pathway. About 12 months ago, I began working with an organization known as Horizon Education Alliance, HEA. Many of you know that organization well. And through that partnership, I had the opportunity to meet Ken Julian, who's the Vice President of Thor Industries and the Director of Human Resources for Thor. It's a Fortune 500 company in our area. And if you know anything about Elkhart County, the RV industry is the main driving factor of our economy. Had the opportunity to speak with Ken. Ken informed me of the crisis that they're experiencing right now in the RV industry, not just in his particular business, but throughout the county-wide. Currently at Thor Industries, they have 100 unfulfilled positions. These are high-wage, high-demand jobs. Through our conversations, we discussed their current practice of training their incumbent employees. Basically, what they're taking is any employee that has any work ethic, maybe no skill whatsoever, but willing to show up to work, and they'll put them through an intense training process. Ken and I got their trainers, our instructors, our administration, and their HR department together and started skill mapping their particular training modules and embedding that into our curriculum. We then took the skill map and aligned our courses, or aligned it with the IDOE courses that most closely aligned with the particular skills that they needed for their incumbent workforce, thus creating a new pathway that needed your approval. So at this point in time, we would ask for your approval. Students that would complete this pathway would have an opportunity for high-wage, high-demand jobs. And within 2 weeks upon the completion, they would be eligible for jobs that could earn north of $45 per hour.
Move to approve. Second.
Roll call, please.
We have a discussion, questions?
Oh, I apologize. Take on. Yes, sir.
Okay, I do. Thank you for all your work. I'm just curious, when you look at the RV industry specifically over the last, let's say, 10 years, do you have a sense of what the ebb and flows look like from an economic perspective and displaced workers? Has there been consistently high growth employment in this sector in that region over the last decade?
Well, the last decade has not been that way. Obviously, with the Great Recession, Elkhart County was the poster child for some economic decline. But having spoken with Ken Julian, obviously as an educator, that was important to me as well. I don't want to train kids for jobs that are here today, gone tomorrow. And the changes that they've made in the industry, they feel very secure, even with potential recession that could be on the horizon.
Yeah, that's why I raised the question is, like, what happens to students who complete a locally created pathway without higher education, move into an industry that is driven by, and like most industries, economic conditions, and what happens to displaced workers? What is the long-term prospects for those students without post-secondary? They may have a pathway that leads to a very specific industry and a very specific job, but what is the transportability of those skills to other industries? And That's been my big question
Yeah.
when we look at specifically into job or pathways created for single jobs.
Yeah. And again, it's important for us to embed the employability skills into this pathway as well. That's why we're working closely with Thor. So kids have the opportunity to go see the skills in practice. But also we've folded in there the opportunity for dual credit opportunities so the kids could then stack this pathway for additional credentials on top of that through Ivy Tech and Vincennes University.
Have you found that the employers are also committed to continuing education of these students once they enter the workforce?
Absolutely, particularly up in our area.
Okay, great, thank you.
That's one of the things that Coach Carter VBSC, they have tuition reimbursement for our students, but I do agree that the skills that you're building are certainly transferable across not only a single sector, but across, or single employers, but across most sectors. Like when we have conversations with hospitals and manufacturing and veterans, they all want the exact same employees. So building those skills is important. Continued education, I think, is a huge part, and that tuition reimbursement is a big deal.
Thank you.
I do have to say that when we did graduation pathways, this is the stuff I was excited to see. So
Thank you.
kudos to you. I'll never forget Byron saying, "Let's let the most bunch of talent do this. Let's take the low-lying fruit and let you do what you do." And this is an example of that. So,
This was certainly a team effort with HEA, Thor, and our administration and hardworking staff. So thank you for that.
And I would commend as well, Scott, on that. And the thing that I wanted to point out that I was impressed with, to your point, Dr. Bertram, the skills mapping part was part that I liked about this the most, right? Because I still, as we talk to business and industry, they really want us to start looking at those transferable skills, those competencies, as opposed to courses. And as you said, we looked at that first and then had to go back to the courses. I still say maybe we look at a world where we're looking more at just those skills and competencies as opposed to courses, right? Why put one more step in there? But I appreciate the fact that you did that. To me, was the most impressive part of the whole process.
You know, it's interesting as you meet with industry, you talk about industry recognized certifications, and certainly that's something that, as an educator, I've been very engaged with and interested in. But it varies from even within their own RV manufacturing industry. Some like MPro, some like MSSC. And there's different types of manufacturing certifications that mean something to some people, but not all to others. So we really want to get the granular level and say, you just tell us what the skills are, and we'll create our own certification that means something to Elkhart County. So thank you.
Sure.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram?
Yes.
Dr. Ernest?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
I would like to say Gordon did text me, and he's running a little late, and as he walks into the building, welcome, sir. Take off. Dr.
Manning?
Yes.
How are you, sir?
Ms. Moe?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watt?
Yes.
Ms. Wicker?
Yes.
Dr. Yeager?
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Motion carries. Congratulations. Next up, we have Teacher Preparation Program, Indiana IUPUI.
Good morning, members of the board. Today, the department brings to you 4 items, 3 accreditation recommendations, and 1 new program approval request. We are pleased to share that we've had 3 recent CAPE accreditation, which is a national accrediting body for teacher preparation programs, for Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis or IUPUI, Indiana Wesleyan University, and the University of Southern Indiana. And I'm pleased to say that each visit was a great success. We do have representation from each institution who can answer any questions that you may have, in addition to the documents that were shared with you earlier. So it's our recommendation that the board extend state accreditation based on the results of the CAPE accreditation decision and we'll start with Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments of board members? We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Dr. McMahon,
Yes.
Ms. Moe,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Ms. Wickler,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick.
Yes.
Motion carries.
And if I could just add one item, the IUPUI has a new dean, Dr. Jesse Perez Mendez, and today is his first day on the job. So I had to point that out. What a nice way to start. And hello.
We have several questions.
Oh, sure.
Knowing that.
Yeah.
You need to get a chair.
Pretty successful first day. Next, we have teacher prep program, Indiana Wesleyan University. Any questions? Do you have any, Ben?
No,
Any
we're good.
questions or comments by board members?
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Dr. McMahon,
Yes.
Ms. Moe,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Ms. Wickler,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick.
Yes.
Motion carries.
And if I could interject, I do want to introduce Dr. Ellsbury and Sally Ingalls from Indiana Wesleyan. And I'm sorry, forgot. Provost, okay, thank you for coming.
And obviously, if any of you, I know some of the folks traveled, anybody that would like to make comments, you are welcome. But if not, we're going to, you just take the approval. That's what I wanted to offer that. Next, we have teacher preparation program with the University of Southern Indiana.
The
Move to approve.
University. I can tell there's a
Second.
little extra emphasis there.
Yes.
We have Dean Zane Mitchell and Bonnie Beach, who has worked closely with accreditation, and Associate Dean, right?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Dr. McMahon,
Yes.
Ms. Moe,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Ms. Wickler,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Next, we have teacher preparation program, Indiana University Southeast.
Move to
Yes,
approve.
This is for our new program for English learners as an addition to an existing license.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Yes.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
Dr. McMahon,
Yes.
Ms. Moe,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Ms. Wickler,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick.
Yes.
Motion carries.
And Dr. Donna Albrecht drove all the way up from IU Southeast, so I have to give her credit for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, we have choice scholarship waiver, Holy Cross Central School.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I plan to give a quick presentation summarizing this waiver request. However, there are representatives from the schools if board members have any questions that they would like to direct to them. This waiver request pertains to Holy Cross Central School. The proposed determination that I have provided to the board members recommends granting the request for a waiver. The primary basis for that is the fact that the school has shown an over 20-point gain in their overall accountability score, going from an F to a D in the most recent year. Therefore, is my determination, my proposed determination, that represents a majority of students showing academic improvement from the previous year. Are there any questions?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions
against this, and frankly, it's just my principle that, schools that are, even though there has been some improvement, and this is nothing against the school, and I hope they continue to improve, but again, if the board were to approve this, we'd be granting a waiver, and again, I just have concerns that the exception is becoming the rule. So I'm going to be voting against this.
Roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram?
Yes.
Dr. Ernest?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
No.
Dr. McMahon?
Yes.
Ms. Sboe?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Ms. Whitmer?
Yes.
Dr. Yeager?
No.
Superintendent McCormick?
No.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Choice scholarship waiver, Holy Angels Catholic School.
Regarding Holy Angels Catholic School, the proposed recommendation is for the board to approve the waiver request for this school. While the school did see an increase in their overall accountability score, going from approximately a 60 to a 65, so a D for both years, but a higher D the second year. The proposed determination notes that in the second year, the most recent year, the school or the students showed at least 50% or more of all students in the high growth category for both math and ELA. Based off of that figure regarding growth, I do recommend that the board approve the waiver request allowing the school to accept new choice scholarship students for this upcoming school year.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments from board members?
Same comments. We have a school that has shown some improvement, but that does not necessarily mean we have to grant them a waiver. And again, I hope that the school continues to improve, but I don't think we should, just as a matter of policy, be rewarding schools for getting D's and F's. So that's where I'm at on this issue. Thank you.
I have a question. Would you go back to 50% or more have
Yes.
improved, please?
So I'm looking at, a second, page 6. On that page, you see that there's a breakdown of growth for the 15-16 and 16-17 school years, further broken down by ELA and math. So as you can see, for the 16-17 school year, 71% of the students were placed in the high growth category for ELA, and then 50% of students for that same year were placed in the high growth category for math as well.
Would you come here and show me where you are? Because I'm not finding where you are. This page.
I think to address the question I just had, Dr. Yeager did note that the figures in the overall data summary on page 5 do not show, for example, I would say the comparable improvement from the previous school we discussed. This school, I focused on the fact that they had a very high growth increase as far as high growth designations. So the basis for the, I'm sorry?
Growth in what?
In both ELA and math. As far as students being placed in high growth versus standard or low growth.
Question. What does a statute say in authorizing the board to grant a waiver? Specifically, what are the criteria for granting a waiver?
So the statute at issue here is 20-51-4-9, and specifically subpart B, which states the board may grant a request to an eligible school that requests a waiver or delay under this subsection if the eligible school demonstrates that a majority of students in the eligible school demonstrated academic improvement during the preceding school year.
Yeah, so a majority of the students showing improvement.
Right.
We have to decide based on what and how they improve. That's been an ongoing question as well.
Yes, it's been an ongoing question, as the proposed determination notes that, that this proposed determination is based on totality of the circumstances. So I did take into account the school's A through F metrics, which did show improvement, at least some improvement for the majority of categories, as well as, and as I said, I focused on the fact that the number of students going from standard or low growth to high growth from the preceding year increased a large amount. And so based off of the totality of the circumstances, I determined that the request should be granted.
Do you believe, when you look at the statute, it is a waiver to delay, correct?
Correct.
It is not a reward system.
Correct.
It's just delaying and allowing students with choice scholarships to continue to access that school.
Yes, it allows new students to attend.
New students.
Because the statute does not prohibit currently enrolled students from continuing to go to the school.
Another question, this is an opinion question, asking your opinion. When legislation provides for a waiver process, do you also think it's the responsibility of a governing board then to grant a waiver if in fact the expectations for that waiver have been met?
Well, I hate to give you a blanket answer because statutes are all different, but I'd say
yes,
generally
would be
speaking, when you have a statute allowing a governing body like this to grant a waiver when it's determined that the requirement's been met, then yes, to answer your question, generally speaking, that's the expectation.
Thank you.
I want to take issue with that because, I think that's an overly generous interpretation of the statute. The statute gives this board discretion. There's may. It says may, not shall.
Correct.
And so this board ultimately has the discretion to make its best determination as to what's in the best interests of the state of Indiana. And so I would, my opinion on this issue is that, you come to us with a slight improvement, and I think even saying that is generous. Slight improvement, and I would like to note, since it hasn't been stated, that the overall pass rate on the ISTEP score for this school increased from one year to the next only 7.5%, and that the overall ISTEP pass rate is still below 20%, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
So in my interpretation of this, I think we are rewarding the school for poor performance. They've improved slightly, 7.5%. But that's certainly.
I would say that I would think the 7.5% growth in ISTEP pass rate, I would refer to some of my colleagues as pretty substantial growth. That's a period. You probably know better how this thing. 7.5% growth in ISTEP pass rate is really high.
It's not.
There isn't a school in the state with a 7.5% increase that wouldn't celebrate a 7.5% increase. So,
Okay, so well, congratulations to the school. They're going from 12% to just under 20%.
The growth rate itself, which was our criteria.
But if I can also point out, the IRE pass rate decreased by 15% year over year, and the ELA pass rate decreased by 1.2%. So. Not to be overly critical, but this is a philosophical issue as it relates to the statute, and so I'm not criticizing the school itself. Congratulate them on their success year over year, but I'm just making the point that under the statute, the discretion is given to the board, and certainly when you're penalizing existing students, we're just saying, hey, we're going to pause new students until more demonstrable improvement is shown. So,
And I'd just like to note that there are representatives from the school if the board has any questions specific to them.
yeah. I have one other question for you as well. And perhaps this is a philosophical question as well. And when you look at choice options for students in the state of Indiana, whether it's charter schools, non-charter public schools, and their access to those schools, are there any other situations in which students are limited and their choices are limited based on the performance of the receiving school? If a
Not
student,
that I can think
if
of
a
off the top
student
of my
is
head.
at public school A and wants to transfer to public school B, it does not matter how public school B performs. They could be a perpetual F school in improvement, and that student can still go there and still choice into that school.
Yes, and
If
actually,
a
I
student
believe
can
if
go
I-
to a charter school that is
Yes.
not performing. A student can go from a charter school to a non-charter public school, which is low-performing school, correct?
Correct.
No other place are those choices limited, with the exception of schools offering choice scholarships. And in many cases, I mean, those are still parental choices and the opportunity to access those. So what we're really doing is cutting off or limiting access to those schools for a very, very small percentage of students. Would that be accurate?
That sounds like an accurate summary, yes.
If I can just say, and I definitely want to hear from the school, but that's true as it relates to public schools. But here we are talking about a special program that was created by the state to enable students to go to private schools, with the expectation that those private schools, the taxpayers would be funding education that would be improved, not just choice, but an improved education. So I would just like to draw that distinction and say that we hold those schools to be at a higher standard than we might otherwise, simply because they're private and they're receiving taxpayer dollars.
Which is predominantly with low-income students who want to access a different choice. And we're taking low-income students in many cases and eliminating those choices for them, right? And I think there's an equity issue at play as well.
Good morning, members of the board. I'm joined by Christian Dalavis from Notre Dame ACE Academies. My name is Heather Willie. I have the pleasure of representing Notre Dame University. And I wanted to share just a couple of pieces of context about these schools, both the one you previously approved as well as this school. And then Christian's here to talk a little bit more about some of the changes being made, particularly at Holy Angels, since that's what you're discussing currently. A few years back now, just two, in the 2016-2017 school year, the Archdiocese of Indianapolis engaged the University of Notre Dame to come into the school and basically provide turnaround services to all 5 of the Archdiocese schools here in Indianapolis. This was a unique partnership, really formed, and the goal was to ensure that the academic performance in all schools received excellent status for all kids. These are very significant schools within the Archdiocese system because they serve almost 95% free and reduced lunch kids. They have a very challenging population with a lot of language speaking children as well. And over the last several years, 2 years now, they've been really focused in on changing the school in all aspects, really focusing on teacher practice development, installing new leaders in every single one of the schools, making sure that the curriculum and local assessments were retooled and realigned to provide increased academics for the schools. And so we really have seen a tremendous difference, and I'd like to let Christian just talk a little bit about that. We've also looked across the school system, replaced a number of teachers who were historically producing, low academic results for the students, and so it's been a really huge infusion, which is why we think it's so important to have the opportunity to continue to serve students in the school. This is taking us 1 year to give us more time to work, to allow the new principal who was just installed in the school to bring that experience and refocus the academics even further than they already have been. As the results have shown, we have been making some significant progress. But with that, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I would like to have Christian talk just a minute about the program.
Hi, thank you very much. I just want to reiterate what Heather shared, which is 2 years ago, the Archdiocese of Indianapolis invited the University of Notre Dame to partner with the 5 schools in Center City, Indianapolis, to help turn the schools around, strengthen the academic achievement of the schools, and grow the enrollment of low-income families in the schools. And we've been working hard for 2 years to really strengthen especially the pathway to college for kids in Indianapolis. We're really getting started on this runway, and our biggest fear is that the sanctions that the schools were really already, especially Holy Angels and Holy Cross, were facing would really take effect and have some really damaging effects on the schools before we had a chance for our interventions to take effect. This wouldn't, we certainly don't want to reward schools for poor performance. We want to have a little bit longer runway for the interventions that we're putting into place to take effect. We have already done a national search to hire a new principal who we recruited from Milwaukee to move here with his family at Holy Angels, who just started about a month ago. He's already succeeded in recruiting dozens of new students who are eager to start at the school next Tuesday when they start back up. We have, I think, 38% enrollment gain there that we're looking at potentially having. We have, as you've seen, pretty significant achievement gains in terms of moving low-performing, low-growth students out of the low-growth category and moving them to the high-growth category. That doesn't necessarily shift the letter grade yet, but it will over time, we believe. We've hired 7 new teachers in the past year and a half. And we've focused that on looking at teachers who have low achievement and low growth, and so we're really focusing on really changing the achievement gap in these schools. We've got, in fact, a team of our university faculty right now over at the Catholic Center right now doing a professional development for about 100 teachers of the 5 schools this morning before school starts next week. So. We're committed to working with the Archdiocese for the long haul. We're going to be in these schools for the long haul as long as the schools can stay open. Frankly, these sanctions really create an existential threat for our schools if in the long run. But we believe that given a bit of a reprieve, we can make the changes and turn the schools around with a little bit of time.
Thank you. Any questions?
Can I ask Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. Tim?
So schools come to us, this is a 1-year waiver.
Correct.
If they have a D again next year, they will be here again.
Correct. Well, they would
Potentially.
presumably, yeah.
So I guess a couple of my thoughts, and I appreciate you coming and I appreciate you speaking, and I can appreciate that you have a large number of free and reduced and dual language students, but to me that's not pertinent in so much that so does everybody across the state and are still held accountable. That being said, I'm a believer in growth and choice, and you're going to have to demonstrate at least the same amount of growth again next year in order to not be here again. And so, in my opinion, you've shown growth, but I won't probably consider that as much with the same leniency if you can't continue it.
Any other questions on board members?
I just want a point of clarification. I just want to be clear on Carrie's question. Would they have to show the same amount or more growth?
In order to get out of a D, because they're up
Right.
5.3%, and so
Okay.
they'd have to get another 5 to
Perfect.
be a C. Does that make sense?
On the letter grade, yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking about when you asked about coming back for a waiver.
Yeah.
So, perfect, thank you.
I'll just say real quickly, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dr. Yeager.
Thank you. I want to go back to 7% growth or 7.5% growth from 12% to 19.5%. Yeah, Tim, this is you. And I agree with Mr. Henry that that's not significant. If it would be significant if they were already at 88%, 7.5% growth, that's significant. You're talking about a smaller number of students that you can impact. But that 7.5% growth from 12 to 19.5, I'm with Mr. Henry on that situation. The other question I have, Tim, is on, let's go back to page 5.
Okay.
And help me work through this because I'm not sure. So we look at 42% in 2015-16, 42.9% in ISTEP ELA. Am I correct?
That is the pass rate, yes.
And then 16-17, we're at 41.7%, correct?
Correct.
That's a decrease of 1.2%. I read pass rate went from 100% to, in 15-16, to 84.6. Am I correct with that?
Correct.
And that's a negative 15.4%
From the prior year, yes.
from the prior year. Does that matter?
Of course it matters. That's why I listed. I try to give the board the best overall picture of the school's performance as possible.
So what are we paying attention to that they've increased that much to overlook those negative rates? What overrides that?
So in my opinion, of course, the board is the ultimate authority here, but in my opinion, the fact that the school had demonstrated the significant improvement of students moving into the high growth category from the prior year in both math and ELA, coupled with the fact that their overall grade did improve, or I'm sorry, their overall score did improve, that, based off those figures, I determined that they had met the requirement of the statute. Again, the board has discretion and ultimate authority here. This is a proposed determination.
Chairman, question?
But hold on
I'm
one
sorry.
second.
I'm sorry.
I'm just about done. Thanks.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So there is significance in the negative experience growth. Let me know when
I'm
you're ready.
sorry.
Ready?
Yes.
Okay. There is experience we do have experience in negative growth from 15-16 scores to 16-17 scores in I-STEP ELA and I-STEP math pass rate. No, I-STEP, it's I-read pass rate. Correct.
Yes.
That's a question.
So based off the chart I believe you're looking at right now, the overall pass rate for I-STEP ELA did decrease 1.2%, and the overall pass rate for I-read did decrease 15.4%. But I believe regarding I-read, the school would like to address that briefly.
The school was so small last year that 15.4% represents 2 students. So
That happens all the time, all across Indiana,
just to give you
all
context,
across public, private, parochial schools. Happens all the time. One student can make a difference between a C and a B or an F and a C. I get that.
Sure. Just to give you context.
Yeah, well, we all deal with that.
Sure.
Any other questions?
With respect to the statute and granting a waiver, doesn't matter what the overall pass rate of the school is.
I would say that's up to the board to determine.
By statute, does it mention that if you have a certain pass rate and show growth, therefore we could grant a waiver?
No,
Or does it say if the majority of students show growth? It could be that that school has 0% passing. Another school could have 60% passing. But the statute doesn't address that at all. It doesn't say where you start at. It says, does the majority of the students demonstrate growth? In your analysis, your belief that the school, based on ELA and math performance, have shown growth. The majority of the students have shown growth.
Just for a point of clarification, the statute says academic improvement, not academic growth.
Improvement.
But going back to a comment I made earlier, because the statute is not specific, as you just mentioned, that's why these determinations are based off the totality of the circumstances. We try not to limit what the board can consider. That's why we put so much information into these proposed determinations.
But it shouldn't matter where they're at in terms of relative performance. I mean, that's what the letter grade establishes.
You're right. The statute does not say you have to go from a C to a B or anything like that. It simply says
we have a
academic
process
improvement.
to determine those grades. The waiver then is if the majority of students are showing academic progress.
Exactly.
And it doesn't say across every metric.
Correct.
Right? And so if you look at the 2 primary indicators that determine school grades, in your conclusions, the school has shown improvement in those 2 areas. The majority of students have shown academic progress.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Just one final comment. I'm confident you're going to get your waiver today, but again, just bringing up my point as it relates to the statute. I've been clear month after month as we've seen these that there's issues with the legislation that need to be addressed, and then secondly, just as it relates to the school. I'm really pleased to hear, the involvement of the University of Notre Dame, of many of the steps that you've taken, I have a much higher degree of confidence that we will not see you back here next year seeking a waiver because of the steps and things that you're going to implement. I have a higher degree of confidence in what you have proposed, as I have other schools that have come before us making, assurances, et cetera. So I wish you well. Good luck with good luck with the changes, and again, hope that you see that strong performance that you're planning for. Thank you.
Any other questions on board members?
So how do we pick and choose what criteria we use to say this is significant enough to approve, or we're going to ignore these two negatives and pay a whole lot of attention to other criteria? Because there's certainly a confliction of growth and negative in this request.
So, as I mentioned, I don't really see it as a picking and choosing. That's not the way I would describe it. As I've said before, it's a totality of the circumstances. You have correctly indicated that there were two metrics, past metrics, that did go down, but the majority of the other metrics in that chart do show improvement to some degree, coupled with the large amount of growth that the school demonstrated in both math and ELA. So again, it's the totality of the circumstances. I'm not trying to pick and choose randomly. I'm trying to say that looking at the whole picture, everything the school is doing as far as academic data, it appears they have satisfied the statute, requirement of the statute.
So the number of scores that are in the black versus the number of scores that are in the red, is that what I just heard you say? Makes a difference in what your determination, your recommendation is?
Yes. The overall totality of the circumstances for that school.
So we're convinced that the majority, I think the statute reads, the majority of the students in the school showed growth. Did it say how much, or does it say significant growth, or does it say growth? What does it say?
Well, the statute doesn't specifically reference growth. But in this situation, majority of students demonstrated high growth.
High growth. Okay.
Any other questions on board members?
I just wanted to follow up with Dr. Eger. So when you look across those metrics in ELA and mathematics, the majority of the students showed academic progress. Yet in one metric, you're talking about two students representing a drop from 100% to 85%.
Based off the school's representation.
And I understand it does happen to in all schools, but you're talking the majority of the students on the metrics you identified versus a single metric in which two students represent a 15% drop.
Yeah, so
when you look at the totality, they're not all created equal. You could look at 2 or 3 metrics and say the majority of the students have made progress in these areas, where 2 students dropped in one area and showing the decrease. I wouldn't put those in, and the question was, do you add up all the black columns and the red columns and the majority wins? I don't think it's that simple, because some of the metrics are very different and what is represented within those drops or increases. But the big question is, have the majority of the students shown academic progress?
In my opinion, yes.
And I want to remind, I don't want to get into debating how you get to your recommendation. In honest, it's a recommendation. You have the option to vote yes or no here, so let's not debate how we land on your recommendation, because no offense to the work you do, it's great, but that it is solely a recommendation. So I don't want to spend any more time debating how he gets there. If we have questions specific to this, then that's fine. But I don't want to spend any more time landing on how did you get to yours, what are you going to use. I think that's unfair to folks that are here now. So let's remember this recommendation. You have the option to vote yes or no on this. But do we have any more questions specific to Holy Eagles?
Not a question, but just a comment. So, in reviewing this data and looking at this and having my questions prior to the meeting today, obviously we're at a place where it's philosophical here. We don't have clear guidance. We would all feel much more comfortable if it said you have to have 5% or some number. It would help us feel comfortable. But I think the intent here is that every school is different, every school has a different situation. We need to analyze the data and determine, is their academic improvement enough to feel confident that they're on the right track. So I will be voting yes today. I wish that there was clear guidance, but there is not. There's not a clear rubric or a clear number, so we have to make our best judgment. So.
One more. And I just want to respond to Dr. Wickham's. I understand what you're saying. I'm also have the experience of having a school in my school district in my prior life that had one student, if they would have passed, would have made a difference in a letter grade. But there's no avenue for that public school to come here and say, can we ignore this one student? And there is an avenue here because there are several different criteria we're reviewing. So that's the only thing I would say. It happens. I know it happens. And I know it happens with very few students. And I don't think it's equitable across the state in all schools for avenues to create a situation where we could ignore a negative to make it a positive.
I agree. The only difference, though, is the school, no school is coming here asking for a waiver to change the grade. The inequity is that in the schools you're talking about, students and parents still have choices to attend those schools regardless of their performance. This is the only scenario in which parents are limited their choice. All we're saying is that we're going to grant a waiver that will allow students to continue to choice into a school of their choice. In no other situation would they be limited. Public schools don't have to come and ask for a waiver to accept students. That's a choice they make. And I think that's the distinction for me.
No, because they take every student. That's the difference.
That's what they're trying to do. Okay, roll call, please.
Dr. Bertrand.
Yes.
Dr. Ernest.
Yes.
Mr. Henry.
No.
Dr. McMahon.
Yes.
Ms. Sboe.
Yes, and I do have a question when we finish the vote, if I may.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Mr. Watts.
Yes.
Ms. Wicker.
Yes.
Dr. Yeager.
No.
Superintendent McCormick.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Up next, we have, I apologize, Katie.
That's okay, thank you. I think this question is for legal, so if, Tim, if you can stay at the podium. In parsing this through, would another remedy for schools like those that came before the board today, and perhaps some others, be to petition for an exception or for exemption from receiving a grade at all?
So if I understand your question, I think you're referring to the A through F appeal process that the state currently has. So yes, I mean, any school can request an appeal of their A through F grade based off of whatever circumstances that school is citing. Basically, I mean, usually the board considers schools that just believe that their grade does not accurately reflect their academic performance. So that's something that's available to all schools, and this school would not be an exception.
I just offer that up because I think when we're dealing with these small n sizes and some of these specific facts that we have been confronted with, that may be an option for these schools to consider because of sort of the nuances and the case-by-case nature of this evaluation. And so that's been something that I have been sort of academically working through in my mind as we get more and more of a body of facts in front of us, and just wanted to share those thoughts with my colleagues and have your input on sort of this menu of remedies that are available to these schools in order to meet their students' needs.
Thank you, Katie. Up next, we have Freeway Accreditation to the Fuji School for the Gifted.
Morning. So we've provided a memo and materials submitted by Apogee School for the Gifted. Just as a brief summary, This is a school that operates here in Indy. They've been in operation for 1 year, and they seek to serve talented and gifted students. The school leader, David Bonner, is here. Good morning. Who has an extensive background in this specific area. And so Mr. Bonner's here if there's any questions.
Any questions of board members? Seeing none, or any motion? Would you like to make a comment?
I'm open for questions. I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Any questions?
Move to approve.
Motion to approve, is there a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second, roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram?
Yes.
Dr. Ernest?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Dr. McMahon?
Yes.
Ms. Sboe?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Ms. Wicker?
Yes.
Dr. Yeager?
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you so much. Up next, we have freeway accreditation, repair of the bridge.
So this was a freeway school that was under 1 year observation with the Department of Education. I've been working with Maggie Pino. The department's outlined some concerns that they had with their accreditation petition based on the 1 year observation. The state board staff joins in those concerns. We recommend at this time that the state board not accredit this program. I don't know if Dr. Ewing is here. She sent me an email around 8:30 saying she was on her way, so maybe we could get up to the board's discretion if we want to give her a little bit of time.
Why don't we maybe reach back out and
Sure.
come back to this action item?
Good idea. It's fair.
Do we need to do anything to hold this? Matt, or we just say we can just come back to it? Okay. So moving on to discussions and reports. Diploma update.
Good morning. So I'm here to update you on two different things. First, with regards to the math transition course that we are working on in conjunction with CHE, we are working with Educational Strategies Group and working with a joint committee with the Commission for Higher Ed to develop a transition course for students to automatically be placed into credit-bearing courses in college. Dr. McMahon and Ms. Moat have been on our committee for that with the steering committee, so I just wanted to report that the math working group is still working through those details. We have another meeting coming up next week, and we're looking to have a course that we might be able to pilot next school year. So that will be upcoming on that. Now, with regards to the an alternate Algebra 2 course, we believe we've heard there's an urgent need in the field to have an alternate Algebra 2 course to satisfy the Core 40 dilemma, if you will. And so we believe that with both codes 203010 and 2031-3, that there's the avenue to adopt curriculum models, but to adopt curriculum, you have to have standards. And so our proposal and the timeline that I have written has to do with the development or the adoption of the standards for this alternate course. So with that, we know that we're looking at it as like a really applied Algebra 2 course because we know that students have to have Algebra 2 exposure to curriculum because of state assessment, because of to not like end their future in math, if you will, to keep them moving forward. So we are proposing that we would pull together a committee of stakeholders to take a look at the standards that would belong in this course, and then also work with organizations such as the Dana Center and Metametrics to ensure the level of difficulty that is required by the code to make sure that it matches that post-secondary preparation.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you clarify for me, so this is the alternate Algebra 2 course, correct?
Yes.
So why would the standards be different from the traditional Algebra 2 course? I think I just heard you say that.
Yes,
Can
great
you explain
question.
that more?
I think that that there would be a lot of overlap What we believe for this course, is that there would be a lot of the standards, the ones though that really focus on the application. There are certain standards in Algebra 2 that really gear kids towards that calculus pathway. Things that are very theoretical in nature that have always been part of a very traditional Algebra 2 course. So taking a look and seeing what might prepare students for multiple pathways, like into QR or things like that, might be beneficial for this. So taking out, if we were looking at this, looking at a revision, it would be removing a few standards that are specific to that theoretical nature of math and focusing in on some of those applied.
So I heard you say earlier that the field's really anxious to have this occur, and yet from my own experiences, I know how difficult it is to make that shift in pedagogy. And so I guess I'm a little concerned about how quickly this moves forward in terms of really preparing people to do this well. Can you talk a little bit more about where that stands right now?
Sure. So a couple of things are happening. Right now we already have some schools that are trying to do this, but without the guardrails that we need to have in place. So there are already schools that are looking at doing this, but may be really not by their own admission teaching all the standards that would even meet that level of difficulty. So I think that we've also had these kinds of courses in the past. So I think if we were able to, if we're looking at just the type of standards that we have, I think we still have the capacity to teach those standards from the applied level. In terms of what further professional development could we have to do that better, that might be a separate conversation. I believe we have to start with coming up with what these standards would be.
Sure. I just hope that there's a lot of conversation around the professional development, not just up front, but the ongoing support, because it's not a one and done. This is a long-term, very hard effort. So,
absolutely.
Thanks.
I know that Katie would like to speak, and then Dr. Murphy would next.
Thank you. First, Dr. Jensen, I just want to thank you for all of the work that you have done on the committee in terms of your subject matter expertise as it relates to the course. And wanted to share from my perspective, and Marianne, please jump in again with your feedback. But the work of this joint committee has really been, in my view, and I think it's a PowerPoint from Education Strategy Groups, reflects systemic in nature. So really looking at those three categories of strategies of prioritizing the post-secondary transitions work, and then enhancing associated academic supports and scaling navigational supports to look at the systematic approach of teaching and learning relevancy and pedagogy in this space. And so my concern is with the timeline and sort of deviation from the guidance that has been provided by the Dana Center in partnership with the Gates Foundation around how this alternative Algebra 2 course can be part of that systematic revision of the teaching and learning approach for these students to accomplish our purpose of easing the transition into post-secondary, regardless of the student's math pathway, which I think you were sort of alluding to, Dr. Jensen, in referring to calculus, et cetera. So for that reason, I just want to make my colleagues on the board aware that I think the timeline in the memo would not allow us to continue the systemic approach. It would allow to change a course in isolation and would allow to address those standards, but it would no longer be aligned with the systemic approach, which I think long term, as we look at the other work we've done with grad pathways, et cetera, is our best course of action. And so what I would ask for is that we go back to the post-secondary transition steering team, ask for an update on the Dana Center guidance and how we can align that with the Gates Foundation, and what a timeline for that work might look like. And Marianne, I don't know if you care to speak to that.
No, I appreciate your thoughts, Katie, and agree that that would be a great course of action, and to move more quickly without doing that, miss an opportunity. It's okay.
Jennifer, let me know when I'm okay to chime in.
Dr. McCormick, next up.
So I'm glad that Ms. Moat brought up the Dana Center along with the Gates Foundation, because in all fairness, Dr. Jensen and I were just made aware of this the last few days. And so we know that there is a big push to be in the national spotlight to look at this course along with curriculum. Our charge from our current committee with the transition team has been looking at the course, looking at standards, knowing that curriculum is a beast that we would have to take on, and that timeline would have to reflect that. But the conversation that Dr. Jensen is surrounding her and the information you are being provided is simply the standards within the course piece, not the entire curriculum. I have made it clear to those on the transition team and also in the governor's office that we are absolutely interested in having further conversations about developing a curriculum so that we have more resources out for the field. But our timeline just reflects simply the course and the standards, because in reality what is happening, like Dr. Jensen just mentioned, schools are already moving ahead. We want to make sure that we are providing them with good guidance on rigor and making sure that we are being a good partner in their efforts. So with or without us, that work is going to be done. That's why we're trying to make sure that we are aligning with the field's needs, and they are signaling to us by the fall of the next school year they really want something ready to go. Again, if we looked at the course, the standards, and the curriculum, that would have to be a totally different timeline. But for the course piece, again, the only thing you're looking at from Dr. Jensen is on the standards with the course, not the entire curriculum work.
Just a couple of questions. When you look at over time, what percentage of our students? Did you hear the second question? What percentage of our students will have to take Algebra 2 or this alternative course?
Well, the goal would be that 100% would take either this course or the Algebra 2 course.
Yes, okay. Right, 100%. So when we look at grad pathways and employers and things that are being created for students to transition, perhaps directly to the workforce, into high-demand, transportable jobs, how many employers say Algebra 2 is absolutely essential for this? Right? And how many, I'm just curious, from a skill set perspective, how important is it, in your opinion?
I think that most of Algebra 2 is essential for our kids.
Is it really?
Mm-hmm.
So to work in the RV industry in Elkhart, Algebra 2 is essential for those students to pursue those kind of pathways?
Well, I think we have to also answer a bigger question. I would say yes. I think there are components from analyzing statistics, which is what Algebra 2 gets into, to just being able to create better models for things. But I think we also have a bigger question. I mean, to your point in terms of sustainability of the RV industry, like if we start funneling students out of math or out of this Algebra 2 pathway too early, then we may have shut a lot of doors for them. So I think that in terms of, where we want to set up all of our students to have multiple pathways. So that's why I would argue that most of Algebra 2, and that's why I'm going with most of it, because I'm saying that piece that is that applied piece that really allows that quantitative reasoning is essential for all of our students.
And that's an Algebra 2 course?
That's a largely Algebra 2 course.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So, yeah, I guess the question I have is, who on the Sboe staff is working with this group?
Who on the DOE staff? Oh, Sboe staff. So we have when we've been looking at creating this this committee, I've reached out to Dr. McMahon and Ms. Moat because of their involvement with the steering committee to have representation on our committee as well, whether it's them or a designee.
So should we have staff involvement?
Well, I would just say if eventually we're going to be called upon to vote on this, I know, at least from my perspective, I would like for at least one of our staff members to follow the process from beginning to end if we're going to have to vote on it.
I I don't know what that process, I mean, I would concur with Tony's thoughts, so I would hope that our staff would be included just in that collaborative manner from the beginning, but I don't know what that process is like. Dr. McCormick reports them? Okay. So Tony, is that a request to have, Tony, what would your request be?
I don't, like you said, BJ, I really don't understand the process. I would just like for an SBOE staff member to also be involved and follow that process.
Tony, if you give us 1 second, we're going to listen to the process.
Well, Dr. McCormick, by statute, appoints the committee that reviews standards. So, you know, the suggestion, the consideration is something that would go to Dr. McCormick, and then she would appoint the committee.
So there would just be a request, Dr. McCormick, to the process?
Yes.
I have another question, BJ.
Katie, then Brian. Katie, you're up.
Okay. Dr. McCormick, can you speak to our other thought, since it is a joint commission, on developing or moving forward with the Applied Algebra 2 course sort of out of sequence with the broader systemic work? Have you had the opportunity to discuss this with her? And if so, can you share her thoughts?
Katie, if that was directed to me, you're going to have to repeat that because you're coming in and out.
Okay, yes. So the commission, or strike that, the steering committee is a joint committee with the CHE and the DOE. And my question is, can you speak to, I guess I'll ask it in two parts. First, have you had an opportunity to speak with Commissioner Lovers about moving forward the Applied Algebra 2 component of this work, independent of the systemic focus that is the work of a steering committee?
So we have been in conversation with CHE, and initially these were two different lanes. We were having a conversation about the math transition coursework and the Algebra 2, alternative to Algebra 2. And so we didn't think that was very sensible. So we are trying to take a hybrid of that group in order to do the work and broaden it on the other end of the Algebra 2 work. So we're trying to have overlap in these two worlds because initially they were living in two different lanes, and we're trying to bring them together. So yes, we're having conversations to make sure that that work is happening and make sure there's overlap on those committees.
So does she support moving forward Applied Algebra 2 in the way that you're recommending as being complementary to sort of formalizing the ongoing collaboration routines between the Department of Education and CHE to deliver on the recommended strategies that come out of this work?
Well, I'm certainly not going to speak for Commissioner Lovers. That would be inappropriate. But what I will say, we have not heard any concerns, unless Dr. Jensen, have you heard any concerns from CHE?
About the alternate Algebra 2 course in particular? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I will tell you that in our math working group, when it was brought up that there could be a potential change in course requirements, a lot of the CHE representatives were very anxious about this because they have predicated so the four-year institutions have predicated their admission on the completion of an Algebra 2, so they were very concerned about it. When I talked about the idea that we had about making it mostly Algebra 2 with that applied, they actually were like, oh, we actually think we could get behind that. So they were very, I mean, this was just the math working group particular with Ken Sauer there, but they were very amenable to that idea. They became, they were a lot more anxious when it started, when there was more talk about things other than any form of Algebra 2.
Katie, any other questions?
No, thank you.
The few schools, you mentioned early in your comments, a few schools have jumped the gun a little bit and are trying something. What's happening with them? So I'll stop there.
So sorry, there are schools that are certainly trying things, based on, we have reached out to some of them because we've had concerns about the number of actual Algebra 2 standards that they're covering in a course that they are calling Algebra 2. At this point in time, I don't know of another course of action that we have in terms of like policing that, other than talking with them and suggesting that they cover all of the Algebra 2 courses if they're standards if they're teaching an Algebra 2 class.
So what if they aren't? What's our recourse as we need, as a board, do we need to be concerned, and as a department, do we need to be concerned if they're not meeting the standards of Algebra 2 and attempting to locally substitute something? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm curious as to where we're going with that handful of schools.
With all schools, curriculum is done as you know, at the local level. And for the most part, we all rely on the good faith of everybody to implement and instruct to the standards with fidelity. If they do not, we don't have curriculum police or anybody who can come in and tell them, don't do this. We do find, however, that our schools do want to do the right thing and do want to meet the standards. And so Dr. Jensen and her staff contact the schools and assist them and help in finding a way to make sure the standards are being implemented with fidelity. But theoretically, if a school didn't do it, there's really very little that either this board or the department can do.
So here's my fear, as if we have counselors that are recommending students enter this class as a substitute for Algebra 2, and it's going to count towards your Algebra 2 credit, or if we're calling Algebra 2 and actually not following the curriculum, state curriculum, are some students going to be shortchanged when they come to the end of their high school careers, and all of a sudden the counselor calls them into the office in April and say, oh, by the way, this Algebra 2 credit doesn't count and you don't get this diploma, you're going to qualify for this diploma. That's my fear, is students being shortchanged at the end of their experiences with it, to nobody's fault. Well, that is, we could point the finger to somebody's fault, but the student's going to receive the ramifications of that, and that's not a pretty sight at the end of your senior year.
Well, one would certainly hope, as you say, that would not occur because we don't ever want the students to suffer. The statute that was amended in this most recent legislative session that talks about the board adopting essentially alternatives to Algebra 2 also is very detailed, that parents have to be advised that their children are taking an alternative class and they have to consent to it. And in that consent, they are advised that post-secondary institutions may not accept this alternative course. And so I think the statute seeks to address the concern that you're raising. Again, we would hope that all of our schools would be mindful of what the students need and what will advance them to what occurs after high school.
I think, if I can add to that too, just for a second, I think that the problem that we have now then is that students wouldn't even be getting that notification. They may be sitting in a class that is not being taught at the level of rigor, but it's still being tied to the current Algebra 2, and so then they will end up believing that they have that Algebra 2 credit and are ready for school, and then find themselves in a remediation course because they're sitting in a class that has not been defined appropriately. So they wouldn't even be getting that notification up front.
And that's my fear, is that students are the ones that are shortchanged. And what can we do? And I know you're accurate, Marcia, with your response, but is there anything we can do to these handful of schools that you're aware of that might be trying to substitute curriculum that doesn't meet the standards, that do not meet the standards of our Algebra 2 curriculum as adopted by this board?
Well, I think, as I said, Dr. Jensen and her staff are contacting and going to these schools and letting them know, we see you, we have eyes on you, we know what is occurring. And I think in those situations, schools do not flaunt that. They don't say to Dr. Jensen, take a hike. That's not how that works. So the department is intervening to the greatest extent that it can in order to assist and correct and make sure that what is being taught is appropriate. But certainly having the standards formally proposed and adopted by the board will go a long way to putting guardrails, because right now I think some schools do believe that their students need this alternative. Obviously, a lot of people believe that, or it wouldn't be in the statute. It wouldn't have been a subject of conversation. And so it's important to establish these standards, to have guardrails, so that there's more chance of it being taught appropriately than, I don't want to say it's being taught inappropriately, but it's being taught without the standards being established.
Obviously, I'm still bothered by this. So, as State Board of Education members in the Department of Education, we are challenged to be child advocates in every avenue that we become aware of. And if we're not, I fear, because I've seen this happen, I fear for the child that gets to the end of their senior year and they're informed that, oh, by the way, this doesn't work. So what are we doing to make sure that that doesn't happen? What are we doing as child advocates to make sure that that doesn't happen?
I may oversimplify this, because I agree with what I'm saying. You cannot just say there are no substitutes at this point. We're going to figure this out and give you a substitute. That doesn't exist.
We've actually said that to the schools that we've had conversation with. I mean, that doesn't mean that they still won't do their own thing, as we're saying that. But we've actually have said that specifically to students, and that is actually in the guidance around graduation pathways in terms of just even talking about the math requirement, saying that, Algebra 2 is still a current requirement for the Core 40 diploma until we have another substitute.
We put in writing to those schools, be careful, because this is what may be the consequences. Have we put that in writing to them so that they understand? Because I know that all the schools are child advocates. Every private, parochial, public, charter, you name it, virtual school are child advocates. And if we truly are, it's up to us to make sure that those students know the possible consequences of finishing that course and not having what they think they have on their transcript, which could make a difference. And you brought it up, and maybe somebody else brought it up as well, but there be colleges and universities that will look at that and say, nope, sorry, draw a line through that. We owe it to those kids to do something. Since we know about it, we owe it to those kids.
And I think that speaks to Mary Ann and Katie's point that there's a difference between implementation of high quality work, and that is our concern. I don't say outward, that is my concern. I appreciate schools being aggressive. I love it that they want to go and do this quickly, making sure that they get it right. And before we go, Brian has stuff. 20 minutes ago, Brian, I apologize.
So just a few points I want to make on this issue. As far as the statutory framework that is at issue here, it is the state board that is your responsibility to make these determinations. So at the end of the day, this board will be the one that will be the body held accountable for decisions made around alternatives to Algebra 2 and science requirements. And so I think that's something important, because if decisions are being made before it comes to the board, sometimes that cat's out of the bag and you can't pull it back in. And so I think that from a staffing perspective and representing the board, that we strongly recommend that a staff member from SBOE staff be involved. That is not, we've not been invited to this point. And in addition, we recommend monthly updates, and that the board be heavily involved in this, because that's going to increase the chance that when this gets to the board, that it will be acceptable to the board, and we won't find ourselves in a timeline issue later down the line.
No, that's okay. I've been listening intently, and this is one of those things where I would say I agree with everything that's been said. So I'm going to try to tie together what I think I've heard and where we need to go. And I appreciate your fact, your point. This Algebra 2 thing has bothered me a lot, because while I agree with we need to make some changes, I worry, particularly now having been, again, spending a lot of my time talking to business and industry, because we've been talking through, they keep saying, hey, don't forget, there are Algebra 2 things that our workers need to know, even if they're going to go straight into the workforce, right? So I start to get concerned about that. So in having listened to everything that board members have said, so I want to put this together and then we can figure out where we go, right? I have heard, so this can I call it a subcommittee that's working on Algebra 2 of that other committee? Is that fair? That's not fair?
No.
Okay, then a separate committee. Because here's the deal. We can go back to all the statutes we want to. The bottom line is, and Brian just confirmed this, we have the authority and the obligation to approve whatever we do with Algebra 2, right? So if we're going to take that really serious, to Steve's point, then how do we make sure? So I'm asking a how question, staff. If you want to answer this or whatever, because I'm not hearing any. I'm hearing we could, couldn't, whatever. Okay, whatever. How do we make sure we have board members as a part of that? I heard staff needing to be a part of that. I've heard CHE needing to be a part of that. And I would say they really need to be, if we're going to get this right, to Steve's point, right, that we have kids ready. The timeline is off, according to Katie. Monthly updates we want. And then it would seem that still Dana Center and the Next Gen, those folks could be involved in metametrics we've talked about as well. So how do we make sure, to me, if we're going to approve this in the end, and back to your point, that was really, that if all this is out there ahead of time, sometimes it's hard to get it all worked out. How can we just do this ahead of time and get this right? And again, if I've left something out that a board member has said, I was trying to scribble and get down what I thought everyone was saying. How do we make sure this happens?
So the board could take a vote, pass a resolution saying this is what we want to see. And Mr. Hendry probably remembers the last time we did standard setting, there was an AG opinion, different administration, different governor's office, but there was an AG opinion that said, yes, the board, having the final authority, does have a lot of control there. And we can provide that opinion, but it was almost not identical, but it was very similar. We just didn't even have the additional language reaffirming that in this particular instance, the board really does have the final say. So all we're trying to say from a board staff perspective is we want to make sure we're serving the board and ensuring, because you will be held accountable for this outcome, that this is being, there's at minimum collaborative effort.
Would you recommend that I would make that in the form of a motion?
That can be done.
Is this not true for amendment? This isn't an Algebra 2 issue. This is almost every issue. We have final accountability as a governing body. My question is, how much do we want to get involved in writing courses? assessments. Dealing with consequential things. Like, why aren't we writing test questions? Why aren't we part of that process? Right. I'm just curious, where does it end? Or
So-
is there something very specific about Algebra 2 that has raised the level of concern that we think there needs to be greater involvement?
Well, I think it's, number one, it's an important issue because we're looking at alignment to graduation pathways. And I think most board members would agree that that would be important.
How many courses are there that are aligned to graduation pathways?
I do not know the answer to that
A lot
question.
more than one. I think there needs to be some consistency about the involvement from a governing perspective
Mhm.
of how much we want to get involved in writing courses.
Mhm. I don't necessarily think it's the board being involved to that extent, because the statute does say that there's another statutory provision that does say that the department recommends curriculum models. And so obviously there's a role for the department. We want to collaborate. What I'm saying is, since this is a very important issue, and that board members may or may not have different opinions on this, that we make sure that when this comes time to be approved by the board, that there is an increased likelihood that the board is good with the process. And so all we're asking is that the board take, either through staff or there's board members on the committee, take a more active involvement.
So, just a thought to that, and I'm fine with that. I guess my larger question is, I think there needs that expectation of any of these type of things that there's staff involved. And should we just say, as a expectation, committee work and so forth, and that engagement starts at the very beginning, and not trying to fix it at the end or to come back. I think the real threat to all of this is that if there isn't deep collaboration from the beginning, we get to a proposal and there's conflict.
That's exactly what we're getting at. And
So my point is that it's not necessarily just an output teacher. It's really a number of things that we should have an expectation that there's involvement from the beginning.
Right.
And we don't have to come back the next big thing and say, why isn't the state board staff participating? And should they? And we're taking independent votes to determine whether this is one of those issues.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I would support that motion, Dr. Bertram. I think that is well said, and we have an opportunity to create an expectation around how we will collaborate together with the Department of Education across multiple different areas of work.
If I could just say
So
something
this
very,
is Jennifer. Can I chime in real quick?
Absolutely.
So I guess for Ms. Moat and for Dr. McMahon and Dr. Jensen, they've been at the table through mass transition, and to date, none of these concerns have been expressed as far as there's a big issue with how that transition committee is working or the conversations regarding the need for Algebra 2. We are in the early stages. That's why you have the timeline to set committees, and no one has said we're excluding anyone at this point that I'm aware of. But to set the committees, we are well aware there needs to be state board voice. I'm on the committee. Dr. Moat's Ms. Moat's on the committee. Dr. McMahon's on the committee. So I'm not sure. It's right now. I feel like we are looking for a solution to a problem that is not there. So I guess I need clarification from the state board staff. So Brian, in our meeting last week, I heard none of these concerns. Or Dr. McMahon, I've not heard concerns from you. So if there are concerns, I would love to hear those.
Brian, could you address that question?
So we've been, from the beginning, we've been trying to get information about the locations and makeup of the meetings and have been unsuccessful. And we appreciate board members being
Say
involved.
that one more time.
We appreciate board members being involved, but up to this point, board staff has been unable to get information from the department around the steering committee or this committee. and certainly don't, certainly a member of state board staff doesn't have a seat at the table.
Did you ask?
Yes.
Somebody said no and somebody said yes.
Well,
I think Alicia is.
So, good morning. It's rare that I haven't been up yet. So for the transition math course specifically, when the grant proposal was being drafted for the Joyce Foundation, there was interest to have it be a joint grant from the governor's office, the department, state board, and CHE. From my understanding, it then became just CHE and DOE. So governor's office and state board staff were not a part of the transition committee for the transition course. We have been trying to become part of the Algebra 2 discussion through both myself and the governor's office, as well as working with third-party evaluators for this, such as the Dana Center, as well as considering the science provision that is also in statute. But again, we have been unsuccessful at this point.
I will share with that the transition team work. I have to give credit to CAC for levels and good enough to ask to be a part of that. So I don't want to speak for her, but I also don't want it to appear that anybody's pulling anyone out. So they kind of took the lead on that and they partnered with them.
So this seems like a very easy fix. I believe Dr. McCormick has said we're not excluding anyone. The state board staff said we'd like to see us at the table, so this sounds like a very, very easy fix. I feel like it's headed down a direction it doesn't have to go. Is there consensus among this board? Well, I guess would the question be to Dr. McCormick that the request would be to have, I'm going to make the request. Byron, go through the request that you have again.
What I heard, and again, then I never know, because it becomes, well, nobody said that, or somebody, but what I heard was, we wanted board members, staff to be involved, CHE, there were timeline concerns, and then monthly updates. That's what I heard being talked about around the table.
Along with whoever's already on that. That was your intent, right?
Right. What I was trying to do was get past the, well, no, we don't. Yes, we do. We could have. We asked. We didn't ask. I mean, this is one of those things where I'd pull people in and say, who's lying to me? Because I'm not hearing the same stuff, right? Didn't call anyone a liar just now. I'm just saying, though, we're here. We've just heard a whole bunch of different stuff. And we just need to know, how is this going to happen?
Let's make a motion to ask for a state board staff member to be placed on the committee.
Absolutely. Second. I have a motion and a second.
Just a procedural issue. This is a discussion item. If the board would like to take a vote, which would be an action, that can be added to the agenda at this time, according to the board's internal procedures. If the chair determines there are special circumstances, and that is affirmed by 3 other board members. So that is the first determination if we want to take a vote on a motion.
I'll request
I'm sorry, what did you say, Dr. Bertram? Okay.
Yes, second.
So the chair has indicated that there are special circumstances warranting an additional action item. So we need 3 other board members to confirm that determination.
Confirm.
Can I just ask?
3 people have already spoken in support of doing it.
I just want to make sure we're identifying for purposes of the record here. So,
Is anyone objecting to involving the state board staff? I mean, at this point, do we even need to take a motion?
But we heard from, I would say yes, because what I heard staff say, this is where I get confused. What I heard staff say was they were trying to and couldn't. Did I misunderstand that? Correct, I misunderstood it, or correct? Okay.
So
I'm just going off what I hear.
procedurally, the determination's been made, and this has been moved to an action item. So I just want that to be clear to everybody.
Now, as an action item, I'll make a motion to appoint the state board member to transition committee.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second.
Can I ask a question?
Was the motion appointed state board member or state board staff?
State board.
And is it a request to someone? Or is it actually, because we don't have the authority to appoint to this committee, do we?
They'll decide.
So I think to, just to clarify, it would be a motion requesting state board staff be included with this committee or group or whatever we want to call it.
It's kind of a sense of a board type thing.
And just to be clear, the other things that Dr. Ernest had mentioned as well, that can all be part of one motion. I know we're getting very muddy here, but I just want to make sure we're everybody's crystal clear on what's being proposed and what's being voted on.
So why don't we recap the motion one last time?
It's a request to have a state board staff member as part of it.
So the motion and second, roll call, please.
Dr. Bertrand?
Yes.
Dr. Ernest?
Yes.
Dr. Henry?
Yes.
Dr. McMahon?
Yes.
Ms. Moe?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Ms. Wicker?
Yes.
Dr. Yeager?
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick?
I need BJ to repeat that one more time in the microphone, please.
Okay, Dr. Bertrand, would you please repeat yours one more time?
Yes, just a request to have a member of the state board staff as part of.
Yes.
Okay, before Stephanie, our last action item, repair of the breach, has shown up. Are you okay if we do that before we go on to the update? Let me know if you're ready. That's okay? Okay. So we're going to go back to action items, new business, freeway accreditation, repair of the breach. Right, is that you?
So as previously stated, this school repair of the breach in Gary, Indiana, was under one-year observation by the Department of Education. The Department of Education identified some concerns that are bulleted in the materials, and state board staff reviewed those, had a meeting with the department, joins in those concerns. So at this time, both staffs are recommending that the state board deny the petition at this time. And Dr. Ewing's here.
Other questions? By board members?
Good morning.
If you would pull the mic down, so.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there questions by board members?
Basically, this is basically the information that was mailed to me, giving 6 reasons as to why we were rejected. So what I did, I took each of the parts and placed in the information, from my point of view, showing that those areas were either going to be corrected or to further explain them. So that's what this packet is for. Okay.
Any other questions by board members?
Do you mind summarizing what's in the packet?
Oh, sure, be glad to. Okay, in the packet, at the end, it said that I would have a chance to, for reconsideration. So basically, this is what I did. The first one is stated, it says, repair the breach failed to submit required data collections to the department during the 2017-2018 seeking accreditation year. And I did, and I apologize deeply for that. But I've assigned Mrs. Alice Lyles, who has a MA in instructional design, to do the next year's collections for me. Basically, I started the school back in 1994. It initially started off as a homeschool and was called Repair Enrichment Center. And years later, it changed to, I changed it to Repair Preparatory Academy, Repair Career Institute, and it was actually registered with the state of Indiana as a non-public school. It was 45B 895. Then I changed it over again to Repair the Breach Ministries Incorporated. I initially taught in Gary Community School Corporation from 1986 to 87, but I started the school in 1984. And what I did was, okay, I also have, well, my doctorate degree is in theology and religious education, so is my master's. But I attended Ball State University in education and also have a degree in organizational management from Calumet College, St. Joseph in Whiting, Indiana. So what I did was, the school has always been free. I would get between 10 to 40 children and just teach them for free. That's how God led me to do it. Even one part of the time, I can't remember what year exactly, back in early 2000s, the courts were actually sending me students for remediation. And basically what I would do, I would work with the children, and once they were back up to par, they were sent to their own home schools. I'm coming today requesting to be reconsidered for freeway accreditation. I know that according to the state guidelines, they were saying that I cannot teach, which this year, when in the conversation with the interviewers, I told them I wasn't going to teach this year at all, that I was going to oversee the program that I implemented, I've been implementing for the past 24 years. I'm going to, but I will teach, because with the doctorate, I am able to teach the theology portion of it, theology classes, but nothing else. No other diverse academics I will not teach. I will hire licensed teachers to facilitate that programming. I also have on board now advisors, 2 medical advisors, because what I did, the reason my program has been very, very, very successful is because I include therapeutic intervention along with it. And basically with the children that I get, their class, they were, well, in the writings, I classified them as at-risk children because they were. They were children that were thrown away, that were kicked out of schools, and I would take them in and I would just work with them and bring them back up to where they needed to be. Under homeschool laws, I also, children did graduate from the school, and have been and also have graduated from state universities. And some of them are Purdue University, Hammond, IU Northwest in Indiana, Gary, Indiana, Ivy Tech in Gary, Ivy Tech in East Chicago, Columbia College in Chicago. They've gone to multiple schools. The programming is individualized because everyone has their own style of learning, and how God has blessed me is to be able to identify each child's learning style and work with them on their level. So all the children, there's no competition. There's always been peace, tranquility. Actually, the children become like family because everybody has their own programming. So the only person that they compete with is themselves. They're not competing with each other. They don't feel that they have to compete with anyone, and they're encouraged to become the best person that they can possibly be. So that's why I came here today to really fight for the school, because I know what I've been doing for the past 24 years has not been in vain, and it has blessed so many children. I have 9 children. I'm a mother of 9 children. 5 of my children came through my school, and they all are in college. Well, some of them graduated from college already, because they range from 38 to 18. But I know my program is successful. Basically, what I do is in the format of the school, with children, a lot of times there are maturation problems, and a lot of times they don't add up to the academics. So that's why it's individualized. So therefore, I'm able to assess I use different assessments, assess where they are, where they need to be. And what's also been a blessing too is that the parents, because it's a very, very small community, the parents, majority of the parents, have been willing and they work with their children at home. So it becomes a family unit. The way in which it's been devised, it becomes like a family unit where it's almost like a circle around families type of thing, where in order to repair, rebuild, restore, and revive the child, you also have to do, it can't just be the child, it has to be their family also. So what I've done is I've incorporated the parents in their instruction, because what we do is we'll have in-school instruction days, and then we have at-home instruction days called home lab. And what they have to do, the parents have to sign forms stating that they've completed X amount of skills with the children, and it incorporates life skills. So in their daily living activities, the parents are learning. I even have classes with the parents where they're learning how to incorporate the skills in the daily activities. So what else? I'm not looking at the paper. Sorry. I'm just going off the cuff. Sorry. But I'm not sorry because I'm trying to explain my program and the importance of it. In the conversation was stated that I had under 10 children. When I talked to them, I forgot to mention I have another program. It's classified, would be classified under your grade 12 plus. And through that program is an entrepreneurship training program, and it's for the adults. It's to help them empower themselves and know that God has given everybody gifts, and you have to find your gift, and then when you find your gift, work in that gift. So basically, that's what the 12 plus, I had five students were there. They were actually between 18 and 21. They were our high school grads, but they weren't doing anything. So I got them off the streets too, and that's what I did with them. And it's been very successful. 3 of the 5 now have state licensed businesses. 2 businesses are home health care businesses that are registered with the state of Indiana, and the other one is a transportation business. So that's what I've been doing. I've been working in small numbers, and it's just been me, but I wanted to get the freeway accreditation so I can be able to assist more children, so I can assist more families, because without that funding, I was limited just to help a small amount. But I know the program that I have would be a blessing to not just children in this state, but children in other states too, if it could be implemented in other places, but the funding would be needed. And that way I can hire the licensed teachers, and we're in the process now too of obtaining a building. The building is located at 3900 Broadway. It was actually, ironically, the first schoolhouse in Gary. It was built in 1908, and now it's been abandoned for a period of time. I'm working with the owner in purchasing it. We will be purchasing it. He's out of town now on a trip in Europe. He won't be back for a couple of weeks, but that's where the school will be housed. Our current location is a very small location, so what we've been doing is I've been complying to the 2.5 hours, 5 days a week, 10 students. I have more than 2 students now. Actually, the school is year-round school, and it's divided into 5 terms. So to comply with your guidelines, and I'm not teaching, what I'm doing is I can do skill reinforcement, and I'm using the IXL learning program, and it's a computerized web-based program. So the parents are still able to work with the children at home. So the children have assignments at IU Northwest, because they're allowing them to use their computer lab, and they're doing the assignments under my observation, and then they also have other assignments that they're given to do at home. So because actually our school would have started July 10th, and I think the end date was July 9th to September 17th. I've always had a year-round program, because with me working with the type of children that I had, they didn't need any breaks, any free time, because a lot of schools, when they have, years ago they had summer intervention programs for the children, summer intervention programs, and they even had summer job programs for the children, which kept the children off the streets. Now in Gary, there are no programs like that. So how God led me is to have a year-round program for them. So they're constantly working on academics, so there's no lag. You don't have to worry about, the summertime, the lag time in between, and you have to catch up with the skills. They're constantly working throughout the course of the year. And the parents are still working with their children, so it's an ongoing program. But to comply with you all, I'm not teaching, but I do have that going on to still comply with the school, because the school is still school. We do go Monday through Friday from 8 to 10:30 in the computer lab, pre-K through, all I have is pre-K through 8. And then I did have, there was in this pamphlet, in this, I did have one 12th grader, but he dropped out and he came back in. Prior to letting him re-enroll, I did speak to the Department of Education about it, and they were saying that I could let him back in, but it was beyond the ECA testing time. During that time period, too, I had 3 other students enroll. It was a 4th grader, a 6th grader, and a 7th grader. And it was beyond the testing time, but I did enroll them. They are now, not the 12th grade, but the other ones are now in the summer enrichment program that I have, which covers term 1. But when approved perfectly for the pre-reg accreditation, the school actually, the date for it would still be, we would still have 185 days. We would still comply, because I always did at least 225, 235 days for instructional timing. We will have still, starting in September, the 185 days.
Can I interject?
Sure. Yes. How am I funded? You know, I use my own personal monies, and God bless, with it being a ministry 501c3, we'll get donations. Coming this school year, we will receive from Lakewood School Corporation, because we're located in that area, we will receive professional development funding. No other state funding.
So what are the financial consequences to this not?
Pardon? I will just pray, keep on praying and doing what God has been having me do. I won't stop, because the children still have needs, but I won't teach. I'll just have an enrichment tutorial program or something, and as I get more funding, I will still hire I will hire teachers, licensed teachers, to teach, and then that way I will be complying with your rules and regulations.
I'm just curious from a Sboe staff perspective, what are the consequences, either approval or not approval?
If the school's not accredited, they will not be able to accept choice scholarship students this coming year. And then, but if they're not approved, they could come back again after another year of observation with the department working on these points, and could petition the board after another school year.
So the question around funding, are you receiving choice scholarships right now?
Yeah.
And is your expectation that you would, is that that is the express purpose of seeking pre-reg accreditation?
Right.
That was my question. So that is the consequence, right? Of not being approved, is you're unable to accept choice students, correct? Students pay no tuition?
Because they can't afford it.
I have a question for Brian or Steph. So Brian, you made a recommendation. Can you just elaborate, because it was a pretty brief memo, what's the basis for your recommendation, and, you know,
And I'll invite Maggie up as well. This was a joint recommendation. So the initial bulleted concerns came from the department, because they did the 1-year observation. And then in collaboration with the department, we shared in those concerns on the back end after that 1 year. So we weren't involved in the 1 year of observation. So
I guess if I can just ask, what is your, so have you seen this?
No, not until today.
Okay. But you've talked through this with the school?
Mm-mm.
No. Oh, okay.
I think the issue is with the observation, and Maggie can speak better to this, even assuming that all the concerns were addressed, and that's up to the board to decide. I don't know that there's sufficient time, because you have the September 1st choice scholarship deadline, for the department to go in and look at, because some of this stuff has to be looked at more closely in collaboration with the department. And so I'm not sure that there's a compelling showing of readiness even there at this late
late stage.
Okay. And if I can ask, yeah, I do.
So are we going back to the reasons or?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we had conducted a phone interview after receiving the petition with Dr. Ewing, and then we had a meeting with State Board staff discussing the petition and our phone interview to ensure we had a joint recommendation, since this is ultimately a State Board determination as far as accreditation awarding goes. Through our conversation, and I will mention that we also had Kim Stewart, who is our alternative school specialist at the department, because of the language in the petition indicating this is an at-risk program for students at risk and serving alternative populations. So most of the questions were addressed that and the programming surrounding that. I believe that the memo provided through the posting was the notice letter we sent to the school that outlined our concerns. From the department's perspective, one of the things that we look for is to ensure that the school can comply with all legal requirements. Two of the biggest ones, especially if you're going to be a choice participant school, are administration of the statewide assessment and submission of accurate and timely submission of data collections. The school did not have any tested students because the population didn't expand to tested grades. So we weren't able to get any data, performance data, to see how the program worked. As far as data collections, as indicated, we received no data collections. So through the phone call was the way that we received information about the enrollment and attendance. One of the concerns we had with that was that the Department of Health monitors sanitary schoolhouses and building requirements. And their definition is that a school has to have at least 10 students to be under those requirements. So one concern we had is that at the time, based off the numbers we were given, the school did not have 10 students. So we couldn't ensure that the building or facility would be up to state requirements for students in regard to safety and health requirements. As far as licensed teachers go, there's no requirement for non-public schools to have licensed teachers actually giving instruction. The requirement is that you have a licensed teacher be able to administer the assessment. The petition that we received did not have an outline for a plan to ensure that there was a licensed teacher to administer the assessment, which was a concern to us because accurate administration of the assessment is a very important part of accreditation as well as the choice program participants.
Does that teacher have to be employed by the school?
Does not have to be employed by the school. There just has to be a licensed teacher that administers the. Right, and we do have quite a few non-public schools that do that. However, we didn't have a plan in the petition that outlined that, and there was no plan in our discussion that was provided regarding that.
Given the points for the recommendation to deny accreditation, if these same issues were in place for a school currently accredited, would that accreditation be withdrawn?
It would depend. I think it would be something we would bring to your attention, and it would be the state board who has the authority to make that determination as the ultimate accrediting body for the state of Indiana.
Would you make the same recommendation to this board?
That kind of summarizes the biggest bullets that we had. I think the only other issues that we had in regard to kind of the alternative programming is that the at-risk, the alternative, and again, I'm probably going to butcher this, Kim Stewart is the expert on this, but the alternative programming is traditionally for grades 6 through 12, and based off of the enrollment information, the school didn't have any students enrolled in grades 6 through 12, so there was some concern about the actual programming. And we did not receive a discipline plan, which was a concern given the at-risk population and ensuring that you have something in place for that population of students. Lastly, the criminal background check policy that is required by law was fairly loose in the petition and didn't necessarily align with the legal requirements for that. So, and all of these were included in the notice letter that we sent to the school.
So does the department have any reservations about its recommendation here?
That our recommendation is to deny? No. As Brian indicated, if the school wants to continue, they can certainly pursue the freeway accreditation or general state accreditation. They also have the option to pursue accreditation through a third-party accrediting body that's recognized and approved by the State Board of Education. So there are multiple options for the school to pursue.
Does State Board staff have any reservations about its recommendations? No. And my last question is for fellow board member Tony Walker. He's the representative of the first congressional district where the school is. Tony, do you want to weigh in on where you are, since this is in your neighborhood, neck of the woods?
I haven't met with the school administrators or visited the school, so I'm pretty much in the same boat as you.
Any other, somebody has not met. Are there any other questions about board members?
In the document that was passed around,
Yes.
how many of these issues have been addressed?
I addressed all 6.
You responded
I responded to all 6.
Have they been fixed?
They've been fixed, yeah. Because actually, it was actually, with some of them, there was misinterpretation. With the number 2, it says, repair the breach failed to provide evidence of a licensed teacher available to administer statewide assessments. What I did was, I was instructed by the state, and I was given, actually I was approved to do the testing, and I didn't know that I didn't have a license, because I took the course that was required of me. I took the test that was required of me, and I was actually classified in the records as being able to do the testing. So I had no knowledge at that time that I couldn't test until after receiving this. That was during the school year. But what happened was, this is the first year that we actually got the little ones. Usually I'll get middle school or high school children. This is the first, although it's always been registered with the state as a pre-K through 12 school, this is the first year that I got small ones. I got small ones, and this time I didn't have the larger ones. And that's why the school was classified as an at-risk school. And in the initial accreditation petition, it does clearly state that, okay, I don't classify them as grade levels, it's classified as preparatory levels. And it says the findings is extracted from page 4 in the second paragraph of the Repair of the Breach Ministries Incorporated Freeway Accreditation Proposal, and the following is stated. The alternative education component will remain the same, meaning that it's only been, the alternative school is only, I've been complying with state laws. It's only been preparatory components 5, levels 6 through 8, and preparatory component, because I divided the grades into components. Preparatory component level 9 through 12, in accordance with IC 20-30-8-1. So always follow the rules. So it's always been, I guess it was kind of misinterpreted that I was classifying the entire school as an alternative school, but it was only the 6 through 12 level.
So, but the issues that were addressed by the Department of Education
Right.
and the state board staff, you believe you've responded to.
Right.
So would you agree that the concerns that were addressed were valid concerns at the time?
This was, actually, this one, no, because it was misinterpreted when it was read in the,
But, okay, so,
no.
5 out of 6.
Yeah, and then let's see, the other one. And basically what I did, because I use actually, even for the little kids, when you look at the first bullets, what I did, I put in the petition the characteristics of an alternative school. And actually, the way in which the school is formulated, the first 8 bullets in there, that's how the school is actually designed. So I tried to explain that in it, because we have a small population, so it's only, when I do work with the children, it's a 1-to-10 ratio. Even when I schedule the students, it's only a 1-to-10. Sometimes it's even smaller than that, depending on their learning abilities.
One more question, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
We can move on from that, but I'm curious, so if you were to reapply, you feel like you would meet those expectations?
Yeah, I know I would. I know I would, because
If the department then would have an opportunity to observe the school after these things are put in place, then you believe you would have
I know I would.
successful.
I know I would. And when it came, her question, I think one of the things was for the discipline policy, I extracted parts of it and placed it in the proposal. As far as the criminal background check, in the initial proposal, I chose fingerprinting, but after that, we'll be complying with, it's classified as the Indiana Department of Children's Services Welfare Policy Chapter 13, and it includes, number 1, fingerprint-based check, number 2, Child Protection Services CPS history check, 3, a National Sex Offender Registry check, and then 4, the Law Enforcement Agency LEA arrest records check. So we'll do all of those with all of our employees.
Okay, so we're gonna motion.
I'm going to move to approve the recommendation from State Board staff and Department of Education.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Please call the roll. Dr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Dr. Ennis?
Yes.
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 Mr. Walker?
No.
Mr. Watts? Yes. Ms. Wicker?
Yes.
Dr. Yeager?
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick?
I just want to be clear again because of the sound. I apologize. We're voting to uphold the recommendation, correct?
Yes.
Yes is my vote.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. Okay, now that I've been denied, am I able to reapply, or what actually am I able to do?
You can reapply, it will be next year, correct?
When will that be? So when does it start? Okay, what other forms do I have to submit to you, or what do you want me to do? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, God bless
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
Okay, CTE Perkins. Thank you for your patience.
Good morning. Okay, I'm going to try to briefly update you on a lot of moving parts within CTE and Perkins. So as of last night, we have a Perkins reauthorization, which means that President Trump signed into law the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act. And this law will take in effect July 1st, 2019. For brevity reasons, I'm going to refer to that as Perkins 5, because that is a lot of words to describe one law. So this marks the beginning of a one-year transition period, which allows eligible agencies to submit a one-year transition plan or a four-year state plan. Perkins 5 would reauthorize the federal investment for 6 years, from 2019 to 2025. This authorizes an additional $1.2 billion in 2019, with a gradual increase over the course of the act to $1.3 billion. However, that is not a guarantee. So the question becomes whether we move towards a transition plan or a state plan. And in a recent webinar hosted by the Advanced CTE, which is the Association of State Directors of CTE around the nation, guidance from this association was that the transition plan should be viewed as a simple amendment to the existing plan. However, statute leaves it up to the Secretary to allow for an orderly transition, and no one can predict what the Secretary or how she will interpret that. So due to other timelines per the requirements of the new law, moving forward, if you're going to do a state plan, there is a 60-day review for stakeholders. There's 30 days of hearings after the state plan is drafted, and 180 days for Octave to review. And that would require, potentially, the plan would be due January 1st, and we're talking a new state plan. And so for these reasons and the timelines, and also with the work of the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, I think it behooves us to move more cautiously and aim for a transition plan rather than to draft an entire new state plan. There is no vote to be taken, but I'm just strongly encouraging us to look at the transition plan rather than draft a four-year state plan. Current fiscal status of Perkins 4 in terms of our allocation from the feds. So we currently have 3 grant years open, fiscal years 16, 17, and 18. Each of these run on a 27-month cycle. So for fiscal year 16, all federal funds have been drawn down at this time, and the final closeout is, December 31st of this year. For fiscal year 17, the final closeout is December 31st, 2019. So out of the $24 million plus grant award, we have currently $11.7 million has been spent, with an additional $9.9 currently obligated, leaving an unobligated balance of $2.8 million. We currently have $12.7 million in unspent funds, but it is anticipated that those funds will be obligated and spent by the end of the grant year, September 30th, 2019. Fiscal year 18, we received a $2 million increase in our allocation, taking us to $26 million. So that current grant period started July 1st, and that will run through September 30th, 2020. Allocations projected for future activities for purpose. Of course, we have our secondary allocations, our post-secondary allocations. We also require to provide funds for the Department of Correction, and then we also have state leadership and state admin. That is all part of the requirement of the allocations. Grants to be issued with the funding purposes, those allocation amounts. We have support for our CTSOs, our Career and Technical Student Organizations, for our State Association for Career and Technical Education, our Association for Career and Technical Education Districts. We also work with assessments. We also have the work-based learning teacher internship, and also working on a teacher mentorship program to address recruitment and retention. So of the $2.8 million that is left unobligated that I spoke of, 2.5 of that is scheduled to be spent down through those activities. There are no other funds to be held back for other purposes, and I'm referring to the reserve grant. So we also have, out of 2017, we had a summer expansion grant that we ran through that. So $765,000 was allocated for eligible recipients. 35 of the 50 recipients applied and were awarded. The outcomes of that grant are being reviewed since their final report, narrative and fiscal report, was due yesterday. And that's the same for all of the other allocations and grants that we have administered. So yesterday was the due date on those. So next board member or next board meeting, if you would like an update on those and those outcomes, and I think that's pretty relevant to the return on investment, I think that would be a good topic for the agenda. On the update on the work-based learning teacher internships, there were 19 sites around the state that were visited. So we contract with Fleck Education to run that program, and so he and his staff visit the teachers who signed up. And so there are other meetings scheduled next week. Participants are developing lesson plans and work-based learning training plans that they can use in their classrooms, and then also share that with their staff at their schools. And also part of the plan is that they need to present what they have gained from these experiences at various conferences. But we are hosting one on August 23rd, and so we will be sending out an invitation for you all to learn more about what they have gained from their internship. But we also, and I know this was another part of conversations in prior meetings, is that we would like to look at how we expand this program. So I think with talking with Fleck that we need to work on the application process and send that out in a quicker fashion. But we also really need to start working more strategically with the Indiana Chamber of Commerce to help them understand what this program looks like and promote this opportunity to their contacts and their partnerships as well. So with that being said, I just have a couple more updates just to say that we are actively participating in the career navigation team through the governor's workforce cabinet. Also active participation on the CTE action team. We are discussing course funding and foundational courses and matters of that degree, so we're getting into the granular level. But what we have noticed is that there are some on the committee who are not quite up to speed or have the understanding about the courses and the funding that some of us who sit on that committee do. So we will be running a webinar tomorrow for those workforce cabinet members, but also for the committee members as well. The CTE, I'm going to say the navigation team, they are discussing grade bands in terms of the navigation tool, also discussing on involving adult education and how do we look to address their needs and what sort of career exploration is needed for them as well. But as far as my report goes and my update goes, I believe this is the conclusion. I know that we're with Robin LeClaire. She's going to be presenting on the website and the pathways, so she'll provide that information to you. So, questions?
Stephanie, as you've reviewed Perkins 5, did I say that right in the way that
Absolutely.
I like that actually. I was having trouble. It was going to be one more long acronym, right? When I saw that, you're suggesting transition plan.
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to fit? And with your involvement on the CTE committee of the workforce, and I know we've had a lot of discussions, and I think we're thinking there's going to be a lot of changes, right?
Right.
How is that going to fit? Is that all going to fit together, mesh well with the transition? Can you comment to that?
I think so. Actually, it works out better because otherwise we would be making a rush decision to draft a new state plan, which also means everything, the clock resets. So we're talking indicators. We got to look at what our indicators may be. We also have to look at required uses. We have to look at all of our definitions. And so I think that the timing of this it fits perfectly because it gives us time as a state to decide what that policy and what that vision and how that will be implemented, what that looks like. And then once we have that set, then we can start working on putting that language into our state plan. And then they will be parallel. So there will not be any discrepancy in definitions that we're seeing now.
So with that, some of the things that need to be changed would not be able to then go into effect till we actually shifted to the plan, right?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure
So
that was the way I was. I'm thinking the urgency piece, right? So
Right.
that's what I was wanting to know. Thank
Right.
you.
All right, thank you.
Graduation pathways update. Hello.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm not sure if the break took us past noon. Robin LeClaire, Director of School Improvement, and I am bringing you the Grad Pathways update today. Last board meeting, as you know, you turned that over to the Department of Ed, and so I'm making the report today. However, Ben Carter, the Director of Workforce and Innovation, will be making that report moving forward, and he will be the point person for Grad Pathways at the department. I did want to let you know that the Grad Pathways website, which I believe is live now between 9 o'clock this morning and noon. It was supposed to go live. It's been in development stage. And it has the Pathways memo from the State Board of Ed and the Pathways and Practices on there. It also has taken care of some of the issues with the course codes and the clusters that were on there before, so that the concentrator and completer info now are like drop-down menus and much more user-friendly, and I think you'll find those to be much clearer than they were. So that website's been restricted in this new Grad Pathways website. You'll find all those things in drop-down menus. There was a deep dive on grad pathways hosted by State Board of Ed last Thursday, which many members from the DOE attended in order to make sure we'd be able to provide clarity and consistency in messaging. Ben did attend this meeting and will use that information that they gave out to prepare materials for the website and to answer questions moving forward. Brenda Martz has been logging and tracking the questions that are coming into the department about grad pathways, and we have those on a shared spreadsheet so that we can provide consistent answers to people that call in, and that we can track what kind of questions are being asked, where there's confusion, and create an FAQ for the website as well. The Governor's Workforce Cabinet will be having a webinar-style workshop to explain pathways, which the DOE, Amanda McCammon and Ben Carter will participate in. So that's the update for this month on grad pathways.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
And your website is live now, too.
Thank you.
I had been looking and it had just been a link over, so
Yep.
I'm glad that you said I'm on it. Thank you.
Yes, so it was supposed to be ready by noon, so if it's up, that means
It's up.
they made the deadline,
It's up,
so.
and it is a drop
Ben,
down,
we're
just
good
like
to
you
go.
said.
Thank
Great.
you very much.
All right. Unless you need me to sit down and come back up, I think I'm next as well. So I'll just stay up here for the social emotional behavior updates. As I've said the last 2 times I've been up here, that the governor's report was due August 1st. And guess what? Today is August 1st. So we plan to have that report to help inform our revision of the 2006 social emotional behavior plan. However, we've continued to work, not just waiting for the report, but doing some other things. The subcommittee on the integrated mental health services in schools reviewed that 2006 plan over the last month and created some current deliverables. One being exploring the development of a program to place licensed clinical social workers and mental health professionals in schools to provide services for students who are enrolled in Medicaid. Getting schools access to affordable intensive mental health services, and we're wanting to work on that through a collaborative training of staff. Conducting a review of the school-based mental health services, and this is a collaboration between community mental health and schools to provide these services. The model where clinicians could be shared amongst schools, so they'd spend 1 day a week in each school and provide intensive counseling services. The subcommittee has been working on recommendations that include components of a framework in order to be effective, and that is being presented to the SISC in August. And then creating more professional development on school staff around mental health and social emotional learning, and that will be included in that framework that's being presented to SISC. We have engaged other state child serving agencies through the vehicle of the State Child Interagency Collaborative Group to get them to review, update, and weigh in on the current status of issues from the 2006 Social Emotional Behavior Plan. Dr. McCormick recorded that intro to the MTSS awareness video that's going to be on the website, and I actually will be doing the voiceover for the rest of the video later today, so that should be live on the website sometime today. So I have to save my voice so that I'll sound good on that, so not too many questions. We're working on a draft of the social emotional learning competencies that will be done by the end of August. Amanda Culhan and Christy Berger are working with Ben Carter and his focus group to ensure that if the employability skills and standards speak to social emotional learning, they're going to correlate with the competencies that the MTSS team is working on. That makes your day? All right, well, then that makes my day. So part of revising this 2006 social emotional behavior plan is going to be using data to determine the need, current practice, and progress that will be used to inform our conclusions and decisions as we revise that plan. So to that end, because we want to be data-driven, there are data collection processes in the works. The Positive School Discipline Survey is already out to the field, and that survey closes, and they begin working with that data in August. So that data will help inform our decisions. And we should have the information needed from that survey to inform our recommendations to you all, the state board, by late fall. But there's a student services needs assessment that's currently being developed, and the information we get back from this survey will also provide important information that we'll include in our recommendations to the state board on the current capacity of our schools to provide social emotional learning supports to students. The department has a requirement in statute to report the findings of that survey in electronic form to the General Assembly before January 1. And so we should have the results or summary from the Indiana Council of Community Mental Health Centers in the near future, which asks about school-based clinical mental health services, that it will also be included in that report to the General Assembly. So as we move forward, we'll be using that data that's coming out in the end of August to inform our revision of the plan, as well as the data from those other surveys to finalize that plan and have a report ready by January 1.
But to protect your voice, I'll accept a written response. If that's
Okay, thank you very much. I'll get a whiteboard up here.
To what extent do social emotional issues affect school climate and student performance from your perspective?
So from a perspective of somebody who just came out of public education for 23 years, I've been a principal in an elementary school over the last 8, there are a lot of social emotional issues that are impacting our students every day. Trauma-informed care is an important piece of professional development that our teachers need. Social work and counselors in our schools will help our students be more successful, be able to feel safe in the school. And when students are feeling safe and have those basic needs met, they'll be able to meet the higher needs of academics and socialization.
What percentage of our students do you think are affected by social emotional issues that affect their performance?
I would say 15 to 20%. If you look at the MTSS model, 80% of students are responsive to social emotional whole group learning. When we're teaching students skills to, employability skills, even from a young age, from kindergarten, when we're teaching kids to take turns and to, follow rules and things like that, about 80% of your students are responsive to that Tier 1 whole group instruction. Students who need a Tier 2 intervention are going to be about 15% of your students, and then who even need further, more intense interventions, another 5%.
Yeah, so when you look at the 20%,
Okay?
and you look at the investment we're actually making in social emotional health for our children, what are the gaps?
What are the gaps?
I mean, I hear us collecting data and systems, but then there's a true investment in what it means in schools. And I look at things like guidance counseling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what we're doing to guidance counselors today is unconscionable. I mean, we look at the percentage of the number of students they have, the things we're asking them to do, and then we're trying to provide support for students. We're not doing that. We're really not. Many have been relegated to test administrators
Absolutely.
and a lot of other duties other than working with children. So my question then is, what kind of investment do we really need to make to affect the social emotional health of our children and to ensure that the 20% that we know need it actually have the services they need?
So I'll answer that on two perspectives. One, the 20%, because that's what you asked about. I think we can make an investment in some of these data collections and things are informing decisions about getting counselors, social workers, and actual therapists into buildings to work with students. Because as you say, guidance counselors, possibly a misnomer these days, because I don't know how much counseling they are able to do with other responsibilities. So we want to get people who are trained in mental health in working with our students for those 20%. But the investment has to go beyond the 20%, in my opinion, because that 80% is going to be responsive to whole group instruction in an MTSS model. But we have to have the professional development for our teachers to even understand what that looks like in the classroom. How do we teach students? In the past, there was an assumption kids will come to school and they already know how to behave, sit still, get in line, take turns, make a friend, etc. I think that assumption is gone at this point, and we have to be able to teach teachers how to meet those social emotional learning competencies with students at a young age so that they fall into that 80% and that we only have the 20 that need additional supports. So there's an investment to be made for our students even in the 80%. How do we work with those students and make sure they're in the classroom?
Will those recommendations
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, Dr. Bertram, I just wanted to jump in on your question. So a couple things the department is looking at too, as far as I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback. As far as reorganizing the department so we provide better tools and resources and have a point person in that arena. The other thing too is we're having a lot of conversations with our legislative friends to talk about money. There's never enough, and we all know that, but that discussion still needs to happen. We're also looking at flexibility within some of the grants that we can use as far as Title IV from our partners at the Criminal Justice Institute and having more flexibility in those grants so that local school systems can use those as they see fit versus how they are currently prescribed. We're also having conversation about use of common school loan and referendums in this arena as well. So a lot of conversations are happening to free up some flexibility and look at those funds.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Thank you. Have a great day. See you next month.
You too. Assessment update? Good morning.
I just have a few quick updates to share with you this morning. Hopefully, if I can get this to click. Can I get some? Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, go back one for me. Oh. I just have a few. So the first update I have to share is we do have a few assessment windows that have been open this summer. We don't have any significant issues to report related to any of those. The one that's open right now, we have students testing as of today, is the grade 10 retest, and so that will continue into August as well. And then we will have our second ECA window that will kick off in August. Related to upcoming development work, as all of you know, we are building both IM and iLearn as we speak in anticipation of the spring 2019 windows for each of those. We do have another educator meeting that's occurring on Monday to begin to look at new passages that are developed for the alternate assessment. And then one note I wanted to make, we did convene some stakeholders last week to look at the proficiency levels for IM. And we decided to postpone that August meeting that I have noted here, specifically because the recruitment has been challenging with that August date. So we're just going to slide that back a few weeks to September just to make sure that we have the right number of educators joining us for that conversation. And then a few other updates that I wanted to share in light of a lot of work that we did last year around test security and monitoring. We have revamped a lot of our training efforts and also have been thoughtful as we are moving towards new delivery platforms, just to make sure that educators are very comfortable with expectations moving forward. So we are releasing our Corporation Test Coordinator training within the next week. And so we've recorded that. We've actually made it a Moodle course so that the test coordinators also complete a quiz at the end of that training to ensure that those expectations are well understood. Another change that we've made related to test security and integrity is ensuring that all staff within a building receive appropriate training. So in some of the instances that we've had raised to our attention previously, sometimes those that teach at off grade levels to the assessment sometimes still have access to information and share that information when it's not appropriate. So we have extended that so that all staff receive that appropriate training. Agreements, as always, will need to be signed by the end of September, so that is not a change. The only change there is that all staff must do so.
Just real quick, so is that training for the non-staff differentiated, or is it the same training that the teachers that give the test?
So it can be differentiated slightly locally. The standard agreement remains the same that they must sign off on. But obviously those that administer the assessment will have different expectations in terms of the breadth of understanding that they must have to deliver that. The essential component that we want to ensure is that the disclosure of secure information is maintained very closely, because those are the incidences that have occurred that we want to make sure are addressed going forward. And then just one last slide. So just tangentially related to that, as I mentioned, we are addressing with our new vendor AIR some specific training about platforms, I think to your point as well, Mary Ann, to make sure that educators are most familiar with the intricacies that they may need to understand for deployment in their classroom. So with AIR's platform, they will have specifically a certification process that examiners that are going to be delivering the assessment must complete in order to engage in any student sessions. So we're very optimistic that this again will reinforce some of those security and integrity issues that we've had previously. For iLearn, that will be an on-demand course. And then for IM, because of the nature of that assessment, those will actually be some on-site sessions that are provided. So with that, I think I've reached the end of my update.
Any questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have 2017-18 ADEP grade timeline. Maggie, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, we just wanted to provide a quick little update on the state accountability timeline. We provided a memo there for you with dates. So we anticipate that schools will receive their embargoed state letter grades September 10th. We'll have the AITHREF audit and appeal window after that release date to schools, and ultimately the traditional schools coming forward to you for placement November 14th, with the adult high schools coming forward October, because we can audit them a little earlier than the traditional schools. So that is the timeline for the state accountability release. Yes.
Last year, we were about a month earlier than this.
The only reason really is when the board meetings are falling, because we will miss it by probably, our timeline is such that like we will have our systems updated and finalized that we can get data to you probably like 3 or 4 days after the scheduled October board meeting. So if it were adjusted, we could probably get it in October. Otherwise, that's why we have that November date in there, just because we were.
Last year, the schools had embargoed grades early in, like the first week of August.
Yes.
And so when I look at September 10th, I was wondering why.
And some of that too is because of the date that we received the final ISTEP file from the vendor. So that date is a little later this year than what we had last year.
Do you want to do that, maybe a special meeting, or have, I know it's quick to change that
Change
date.
the meeting. That impacts
Something to
so
look at.
many
Let's at
things.
least look at it and see, so sure we get those out. But that, honestly, I hate for.
I mean, it
3 or 4
impacts
days.
teachers' evaluations from
Yeah.
last year. I mean, it
I hate
impacts
for
a
3 or 4
lot of
days
things.
on our end to cost them hurting. So at least look at October, maybe the special meeting if we can't move that.
Just so I understand, reschedule the regular meeting rather than our special meeting.
That would be the preference, but whatever works. I'm speaking for myself, I don't want to speak for the entire board.
I think if it's possible, just because it does, it impacts so many things at a school
Maybe
level.
Maggie get a conservative date so we don't say, okay, let's do it a week later, and then we're not.
Does
there then as well.
rescheduling the board meeting affect any other timelines the departments are working on coming from the state board?
Can you guys work on that, make sure that that doesn't get affected?
We are also, that's on a road.
Okay.
What would you do a special meeting?
Look at both options, how about that? But the travel one, I would hate to move that, because I'm sure they've set things up to be host. So let's not mess with that date, let's look at a special meeting date. Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Purpose of improving those to some amount. Federal school improvement grant project. Okay.
Those kind of meetings, can everyone actually participate?
Brian,
I
can
don't
you
think
answer
so.
that? I think we have to have,
Yeah, you need a quorum.
we have to have 5 in person and everyone else can be on the phone. Yes. Matt, is this you?
Yep, it is.
Okay. Thank
I
you, sir.
just got a reminder, folks could speak into the microphone. I think folks on the phone are having trouble hearing some of the board members. Just real quick, wanted to provide a quick update on SIG funding for Turnaround Academies. I know there may be some lingering questions, so wanted to specifically identify and address a couple, 3 points. The first is, let's see if this works. Hey, look at that. Provide a quick overview of the board's action that occurred last June. Second is talk about the Indiana law regarding the allocation of SIG funds. And then also talk about a response we got from USED with respect to the SIG funds as well. So you guys are all familiar with this. This is the state statute that deals with both the department's duties and also the state board's duties with respect to determining funding for turnaround academies. Just to pull out a couple key points from the statutory language, and as you remember from the June meeting, it's the department's obligation to essentially present recommendations to the state board, and those recommendations, and I want to emphasize this, must be received before the start of the fiscal year. Again, this is why we had this issue come up in June and why the state board voted on it. Second,
Fiscal year starts, what's that date?
July 1.
Okay, thanks.
In terms of the state board, it's the state board's obligation, and again, I want to emphasize this, to determine the amount of state tuition support and federal funds necessary to fund the options for improvement for these turnaround academies. I can't underscore that enough. It's these funds that actually support the improvements and interventions that the state board actually votes on. In terms of the process, again, step 1 was determination of the funds. Step 2 is now the distribution. IDOE is the one that administers the federal program and responsible for ensuring appropriate distribution. And want to highlight this as well. So as the one administering the program, it's going to look at who are those eligible or qualifying schools, and they will only distribute those funds to those schools that qualify or are eligible. And it really is the ESSA's plan that outlines the process and will finalize that eligibility, which we'll see in late fall.
Say that again.
In late fall, we'll have those determinations will be made in terms of eligibility.
And that's a DOE chore?
It's once the data comes in, I think in late fall.
The DOE is the one that determines.
Yeah, I think it's just one, yeah. In terms of determining eligibility for 1003 SIG funds, ESSA provides states with significant flexibility to define comprehensive or targeted schools. And what I've got here up on the slide as well is an excerpt from the email we received to USED, essentially confirming that. And what they say is, ESSA does not limit states to identify comprehensive schools for improvement to the lowest 5%. Rather, it's up to the state. They can define it to be, 6, 7, 10%, and thereby capture additional schools. In terms of our state's ESSA plan.
Excuse me, man. This state does 5%, right? Lowest 5% determination.
I'm sorry,
all F-rated schools, and does that include those 5%, or do we go up to 5%, lowest 5%?
Hey, if you would, please come to the mic just for those folks that are listening. Thank you very much. Sorry, Maggie.
So right now, the way that the language is in ESSA is that it is the bottom 5% or all F schools. Right now, the bottom 5% is Fs essentially are probably like 6.2%, so it goes beyond the bottom 5% right now because of the identification based off of all F schools. That's in the ESSA plan, yes.
So in terms of the ESSA plan, we've essentially limited the universe, and that graph does a good job of showing that ESSA has a broader definition, or it could be a broader definition of what's included, what schools can be included. And then the state's approved ESSA plan kind of has a narrow definition, which obviously affects eligibility of the schools. So in, right. You know, it's, yeah.
Nathan, how about, Nathan, why don't you come on up too?
All right.
Dr. Bertram, will you repeat the question?
Sure. So we have a narrow definition of what that could be. The question is that if we have 5% or F schools, how would we expand in terms of the definition of eligible schools?
Right, so
Schools then will be F schools and that was.
right, so Indiana's definition is actually more expansive than what the federal law requires. As Maggie mentioned, bottom 5% of Title I schools, so when I characterize it does have to be Title I schools, not all schools are Title I. And then we chose to say 5% of Title I schools or F schools, which at this point is higher than that. If we were to go beyond that threshold, then it would require an amendment to the ESSA plan.
But there's no limitation by USF to prevent that.
No, however,
Allows us really to decide whatever percentage we want. So 5% is the minimum threshold, correct?
5% of Title I plus a high school that graduates fewer than 2/3 of its children. So those two categories of schools will automatically be CSI. In a few years, schools that are not meeting subgroups could possibly add to that figure as well. So right now, those two categories alone represent a substantial number of schools, multiple hundred of schools. The only thing I would add to that, Dr. Bertram, is even though there isn't a number, theoretically, federal government isn't going to say you could identify all schools as CSI. You know, the statute does say you must prioritize for schools who are in highest need. And so you would have to say as a state, we have to make a cutoff somewhere. You know, where do we say is that arbitrary cutoff so that we are funneling the supports to schools that in that spectrum are deemed at higher need? You're welcome.
And I think I'm going to ask you to repeat what your answer to Dr. Bertram was. So are the states and our ESSA plan, so those two then recognize the bottom 5% of title schools?
Yes.
And all F title schools?
Yes.
And that could change from year to year, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, just those categories alone, we're looking at possibly 200, 300, 400 schools. It depends. We really don't know. You know, say the threshold were raised quite a bit higher. Say it was 25%, bottom 25%. As a board and then as a Department of Ed, we have to decide, you know, where is our preference in terms of support? Would we support a school? We could expand the definition, but would we support a school at a very high level with lots of money that's bottom 25% at the expense of not serving a school that's in the bottom 1%?
And how do we determine that?
Well, right now, at least for the schools that are deemed turnaround academies, the board does have the responsibility for determining funding allocations. For the schools that are remaining, that are not turnaround academies but are deemed as CSI, then the department, it's going to be competitive. So schools will have to competitively apply for implementation grants. We are able to provide an initial small layer of support to all schools, but the competitive nature is going to be there because there's, even now, with that 5% definition, or F, we don't have enough money to support all schools with that definition.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that's the risk of expansion.
Yes.
Fusion of resources.
Yes. Thank you.
And really the point that I wanted to make, rather than get into the details of what a recommendation is or what we would recommend, is essentially, calling the attention to the fact that USED says that we can expand this to include more schools to be eligible. And the way we do that is through amendment of our asset plan.
And DOE does that, amends the plan?
Correct.
Does it take board action?
No.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Is that all of your report?
There may be one more slide if
Oh,
you.
I apologize.
No, that's all right. So again, it's just really a summary slide, just confirming that the determinations that the state board made are consistent with the ESSA criteria for eligibility. And again, reiterating the point that ultimately we've got to distribute these funds in accordance with the ESSA plan at the end of the day.
Which is where we were a couple months ago, trying to decide, because there was good testimony on both sides of that argument, was do we follow the state plan or do you follow it? Does the state have to follow the ESSA plan? So the final determination is what you have in bold print here?
Correct.
Okay, so we have to follow the ESSA plan.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, keeping in mind the state board's obligations under state statute to fully fund the turnaround academies as the interventions, and the interplay between the responsibility under that statute and providing the SIG funds to these schools.
In June, we looked at, and I don't know if Mr. Walker's still on the phone, but we looked at Gary. Right, is that what you're talking about?
Well, in terms of
fully funding those schools?
It's fully funding those schools.
So are there three schools we're talking about?
The turnaround academy is correct.
So that would be the Gary schools and then 2 IPS schools?
You're correct.
Okay. So they're fully funded because they graduate less than 66% of their senior class?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you. So the bottom line is, when do we make this determination? And we had a great conversation yesterday. I appreciate your time yesterday, Matt, and your staff. The bottom line is, do we fund more schools with less money? Make that determination, or fund fewer schools with more money per school? When do we make that determination, and how is that determination made, or is it already made?
Yeah, well, and I would say this too. I mean, again, to be cognizant of the board's obligations with respect to funding turnaround, to fully fund turnaround the intervention.
So we've done that with those 3, right?
I believe that's right.
Okay. What about the rest of the schools? Is where I'm headed.
I'd probably have to defer to Ron Sandlin to see.
Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Yeager. I don't want to get too far. I want to make sure that the purpose of this presentation is clear in that we wanted to clarify any concerns about actions this board took relative to federal law and ensure that everything was in compliance and that board staff and the department are on the same page as it regards to moving forward in accordance with whatever the ESSA plan says at the end of the day within the boundaries provided by us.
You're talking
by
about
the law.
from the June meeting.
Yeah, okay. But I can answer your question directly. The 3 turnaround academies, the high schools that have been identified because of their graduation rate, that identification can be made because we already have that data and it is final because graduation is in arrears. Right? We're waiting for the remaining 10 turnaround academies, I believe, for final calculations of the federal accountability model, which would identify schools for comprehensive support and improvement. And according to the department, that identification would take place in late fall. And the challenge that creates is the schools we've allocated an amount, but we're not sure if they are eligible And when they are deemed to be eligible, there'll be a gap of about 2 to 3 months, which is what Eric Lewis from CSUSA mentioned today, because they can only reimburse back to when they were deemed to be eligible. And again, that is according to the current language of our ESSA plan.
Is it 12 months from when they're determined to be eligible, that they have the right to expend that money?
The Title I window runs from traditionally July 1 through September 30 the next year to encumber costs. So there's a little bit of overlap each year.
Yeah. Nathan, do you have anything to add to that? Are we on target? Can't see Nathan. Yes. Yeah. Good?
Anything else, Matt?
Hey, thank you for your
sir.
report, everybody. Thanks.
Update proposed dyslexia rule language.
The final item of the day is just to give the board an update on the dyslexia rulemaking process. So in May, the board granted staff permission to begin rulemaking with respect to dyslexia screening and intervention requirements. The statute that controls this puts forward a number of requirements that have to do with screening students in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade for dyslexia. It requires the department to do a number of things, including hiring an individual to serve as an authorized reading specialist trained in dyslexia. They're required to do that by July 1st, 2019. However, we're happy to say that the department has already done that. And I'll introduce Joe Rich, who's going to be serving that role. And largely in development, the statute provides a number of things he's supposed to do as well. But the rule you see in front of you amends the reading plan language because the dyslexia screening is supposed to take place as part of a school's reading plan. To date, there's been a lot of collaboration between myself and members of the department, including Robin, Marcia, Dana, and Joe. We've also received public comments already as of this being posted for this board meeting, and those came from the Recoding Dyslexia group. So that's the reason you see an update at the top here. So this is actually current as of yesterday because I was able to incorporate the comments that we'd received already into this draft. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about processes and procedures for rulemaking going forward, but I would certainly defer to the department if you have questions about the dyslexia screening itself.
Any questions?
Chad, I didn't have a chance to go back through the second document, and you mentioned the decoding dyslexia point, our folks with Cheryl Clemens and Nancy Perry. Were all of those things incorporated, or?
So I received additional information this morning that has not been incorporated, but I will review that and certainly work with them on that. The direct incorporations dealt with some language on page 6 where it talks about the students who must be tested. I think initially it said students in kindergarten, first grade, or second grade, and that was actually supposed to be an and. So certainly appreciate the catch there. And I'd have to look back to see what the other comments were, but that's certainly the one that I know for sure has been done.
But you'll be specifically getting back with them to look at things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, this is for the board's discussion. Like I said, if there are any questions, the expectation then is that any comments I receive, either from the department or from outside interested third parties, we'll try to incorporate those into the draft that comes before the board next month. The board will then be asked to take action on that rule to approve it as a proposed rule, and we'll go forward with the LSA and the rulemaking process.
Could we get a summary of those public comments in the same way we've gotten them on topics in the past?
Yep.
And so I appreciate you incorporating them, but also another document.
I will make sure everybody
them.
has that.
Thank
Absolutely.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I see the word annually. So it says that they would be screened in K1 and 2. Is that annually, or if they do well in kindergarten, they're good, or?
I believe it is annual. It's supposed to be annually.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing that. So
I can certainly look into that and make those changes before the language comes back before the board.
So as you work on, Chad, on those kinds of issues, I'm sure you share that with State Board of Ed staff? Then eventually, is that run by the DOE?
So
staff? Is there a person,
yeah, so
persons that are Okay.
Yeah,
Got
absolutely.
thumbs up right there.
It is, and it's Joe. So in this case, the state board has rulemaking authority and the responsibility to promulgate these rules.
Sure.
However, the rules that we are to promulgate largely deal with departmental functions and things that the department does. So with that, I've worked with them and deferred to them for the most part to put together these rules. And actually, I'll give credit to Olivia, who I don't see back there, who's our legal intern. She's actually the one that took the department's guidance they've already put out and interpreted that in a rule form.
Yeah.
So and that will be how this continues.
So it's like a double check for
Yeah,
your efforts.
absolutely.
Then they can, overseer of that and make recommendations if needed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But again, if there are any other comments or concerns, questions, anything like that, please get those to me, and then proposed language will come before the board for action in September. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Seeing nothing else, is there a motion to so moved?
Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned.
No, thank you.
Yeah, good job.
Like putting cats up for a while.